Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Stephanie Ruggeberg. This incident occurred in 2002 and involved 15-year-old Stephanie Ruggeberg. She had an older brother and was born in Lüdenscheid, Germany. In 2002, her mother, Sylvia, decided to move to Spain for the summer, specifically to the Balearic Islands. Sylvia had planned to start a new phase in her life after divorcing the father of her children, believing the island would be a great place to rethink things. Sylvia had begun a relationship with a man named Peter. Before moving to her new home, Sylvia left her two teenage children, Stephanie and her brother, in Germany with their grandparents. She came to the island first to find an apartment and prepare for the move in the summer. To help with this, she found a temporary job as a manager at a 5-star hotel on the island, working there during the day. Meanwhile, Stephanie and her brother were excited about the holiday and began packing their belongings. On the first day of the summer holidays, Stephanie and her brother went to Mallorca, where their mother, Sylvia, planned to stay for the summer and return in September. She rented an apartment and moved in with Peter and his children. For 15-year-old Stephanie, this was a momentous event. She was eager to embrace life in Mallorca, especially the nightlife, which suited her age and personality. She loved going to parties, quickly making friends with other young people on the island, and often stayed out late, sometimes not coming home for days. She was often seen in bars and clubs, usually with other girls and sometimes with boys. Sylvia was very upset about the situation. Every time Stephanie returned from late-night parties, Sylvia would worry about her daughter, leading to conflict between them. This tension also affected Peter, who often tried to ease Sylvia's worries. Instead of enjoying their time together, Peter felt the need to address Stephanie's behavior in order to restore peace in the family. At the age of 15, Stephanie faced a difficult choice. She wanted to enjoy her time with her friends on the island, but she also felt pressured to listen to her mother. Although Stephanie understood that her actions were causing her family pain, Sylvia tried to convey her concerns to Stephanie. This caused a temporary strain in their relationship, and Stephanie felt hurt for a few days. Eventually, she realized that her family cared about her and her safety. After a few days, Stephanie began to feel better, and it seemed that her family was mending their relationship. However, Stephanie wanted to enjoy her time off with her friends. Since the summer holidays were coming to an end and she was going back to Germany to go back to school, Stephanie asked to spend more time with her friends during the holidays. In return, she promised to be more responsible and come home on time, respecting her mother's rules. After a few discussions, Sylvia finally believed her daughter's reasoning. On July 31, 2002, Stephanie asked her mother again if she could go out with friends. The conversation about school quickly reassured Sylvia. Moreover, Stephanie had been acting responsibly for the past week. Eventually, she went out to enjoy herself, promising to be home before midnight. Her family decided not to wait for her and went to bed, hoping she would honor her promise this time. Waking up early, Sylvia stepped out of her bedroom and noticed Stephanie's bag carelessly left on the hallway floor. Sylvia immediately suspected that her daughter had come home late and was a bit tipsy, leading her to toss her things aside and head straight to her room. Sylvia intended to take the bag to Stephanie's room and check on her. However, when she entered, Sylvia was surprised to find it empty. It turned out that Peter had woken up before Sylvia but hadn't seen Stephanie. Now, Sylvia was concerned because she had no idea where her daughter was, and the family began to feel anxious. Stephanie had a history of frequent partying and coming home late. Stephanie would even stay with friends or spend the night at parties, sometimes not returning for days. Worried that her daughter had fallen back into these old habits, Sylvia planned to confront Stephanie when she returned home. However, as the days passed and Stephanie still hadn't returned home, Sylvia's worry turned to fear and panic. After a week of searching for her daughter on her own, she decided to contact the police. During that time, she contacted all of Stephanie's friends she knew, visited their homes, and spoke to their parents. Unfortunately, no one had seen Stephanie for quite some time. By early August, Sylvia had contacted the local police to report that her daughter had been missing for a week. Since the incident had occurred some time ago, the police quickly began their search. They spoke to Stephanie's closest friends and began questioning bouncers at clubs, as well as tourists and bartenders at bars frequented by Stephanie and her friends. However, no one knew where Stephanie was. A week had passed, events were happening every day, and new parties were being held, making it easy to forget details. In an effort to jog memories and gather new information from the local community, the police and Stephanie's family distributed flyers with her photo all over town. Unfortunately, the leads they received did not lead to any breakthroughs. During this time, Stephanie had no contact with her family. She did not use a card, phone, or messaging app, which is very unusual for someone her age. Kidnapping seemed unlikely, as no one had contacted her family or demanded ransom during this time. Coast Guard and helicopters patrolled the coast and waters as part of the investigation. Meanwhile, Stephanie's family continued to search for her body. Sylvia believed she was alive and may have made new friends, but everyone else understood that the chances of her being returned safely were slim. The investigation stalled as no leads were found in the case. Sylvia then decided to take matters into her own hands. She first searched Stephanie's room thoroughly. Although the police searched the room for clues, they found nothing. Sylvia felt she knew her daughter better than anyone else, which gave her hope. Her persistence was rewarded when she discovered a note in Stephanie's diary mentioning a young man named Marcus. He lived in Dusseldorf but happened to be in Mallorca during the summer. It turned out that Stephanie had met Marcus at a beach party in Palma, and several of Stephanie's friends confirmed this. Sylvia continued to search Stephanie's room and found a camera with film inside. She discovered some recent photos taken shortly before Stephanie went missing. She decided to develop the photos to see what they revealed. Meanwhile, the police were actively searching for Stephanie and spoke to the two sisters who were with Stephanie the night she went missing. The sisters reported that they had spent the entire evening going to bars and clubs. The three girls had enjoyed the summer together in Mallorca, spending their days at the beach and their nights at local parties and venues. That same evening, the three friends had a good time before going to a bar in El Arenal where the sisters' father worked. The police later discovered a clue. According to the timeline, the girls arrived at the club around 9 p.m. From the start, Stephanie was focused on the DJ. She impressed him and she left the party with him before returning to her friends. They all continued to enjoy the evening together. Around midnight, the sisters decided to go home, but Stephanie insisted on staying until the party ended because she was still interested in the DJ. Sylvia provided the police with the photos from Stephanie's camera for detailed analysis. Among the images, there was one showing Stephanie standing with a young man. The club staff helped the police quickly identify him as Marcus, a 19-year-old DJ who was familiar with Stephanie. The police then visited his home. From the outset, Marcus seemed very nervous but allowed the police to enter his apartment. During their conversation, he acknowledged that he had seen Stephanie that evening and that they had spent time together. They both left the club around 1 in the morning after his DJ shift ended. Initially, he claimed that Stephanie came to his house after the party and left about an hour later. Police quickly became suspicious of Marcus' honesty when they discovered a missing watch and a dress in his home that matched the one Stephanie had worn at the party. The dress had dark red stains on it, making Marcus the prime suspect. Despite this, he maintained that Stephanie had changed clothes and left the apartment unharmed, claiming that she had spilled wine on her dress. Although his testimony was unconvincing, police did not have enough evidence to arrest him or file charges. They sent Stephanie's clothes for analysis. With the circumstances surrounding Stephanie's disappearance unclear, police continued their investigation, focusing on Marcus. On September 20, 2002, a month and a half after the disappearance, a witness contacted the police. He reported finding something suspicious at an abandoned farm in the El Arenal area. Police arrived at the site, which was a large building that had been empty for a long time. Inside, they discovered the badly decomposed body of a female wearing pajamas, underwear, and socks. At first, the police could not identify the body due to its condition. Many began to suspect it was Stephanie, who had been reported missing and was being actively searched for. Police collected a DNA sample and compared it with her mother's DNA, confirming that the body was Stephanie's. The police were unable to link Marcus to the murder. Although some of Stephanie's belongings were found in his apartment, there was no evidence that she had been attacked there. The red stain on her dress turned out to be wine, and Marcus's friends confirmed his alibi about changing clothes. So who could have attacked Stephanie? By this time, Stephanie's family had returned to Germany. Her brother had started school, and Sylvia had returned to work. The police decided to investigate Stephanie's family members more closely, having strong suspicions that she had returned home that night, as her belongings and handbag were present at the house. The main focus of attention was Peter, her mother's boyfriend who lived with Stephanie's family. He was unhappy with Stephanie's behavior, which worried her mother. As a result, Peter often expressed his frustration with Stephanie when she came home late or went to parties. The police in Germany brought Peter in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Stephanie's disappearance and death, but he did provide some valuable information. While the family were in Mallorca renting an apartment, they had a neighbor named Torsten, a man from Germany. Sylvia introduced him to the island and secretly allowed him to stay in the apartment without the landlord's permission to reduce the shared rent. For this reason, they did not initially report the arrangement to the police, as the arrangement was illegal. Torsten was worried about potential legal problems, but Peter believed that Torsten was a kind and calm person who would not cause any trouble. Spanish police investigated Torsten, a new suspect in the case. He was living in Uperta, Germany. He was also in Mallorca at the time of the crime. He had a troubled criminal record, including convictions for robbery and sexual assault. Alarmingly, Torsten had left Mallorca. Spanish and German police joined forces to search for him. Initially, they could not find him at his registered address in Germany, so they began gathering information from local residents, especially his neighbors. The police were quickly alerted by a local resident, a 50-year-old auto mechanic. He reported that in February 2003, Torsten came to him with a white minibus. Torsten requested the installation of an emergency light signaling system above the driver's cabin and asked to paint the vehicle in bright colors. He also wanted the windows tinted so that no one could see him inside, even in bright light. Additionally, he asked to remove the seat and create a large sleeping area, similar to a double bed. The mechanic found several aspects of Torsten's requests suspicious. First, he discovered a receipt for the minibus, which had been rented from a car rental service. This raised a red flag for the mechanic. Why would someone invest in modifying a vehicle that wasn't theirs? Second, he noticed a suspicious bag containing odd items. Strange balls, cable ties, several adult toys, and pills. However, the mechanic did not think much of it at the time. He realized that Torsten was planning to modify the car, and the items in the bag suggested disturbing sexual fantasies. The car was later discovered in a nearby town. Police tracked down Torsten, who was quickly arrested and charged with murder. He denied any involvement in the crime. police discovered what was described as a sex kit bag in the converted car. The kit included items described by a mechanic as cable ties, various sex toys, women's underwear, anesthetics, sleeping pills, and explicit photographs of several girls. 2 bottles of chloroform with Spanish labels and a toy pistol were found, likely used to scare and trick victims into the car. Torsten had purchased chloroform from a drugstore, and a pharmacist confirmed this. When the police contacted the car rental company, it was discovered that the minibus had been reported stolen, which intensified the suspicion surrounding Torsten. Forensic tests on Stephanie's body revealed the presence of chloroform, which prosecutors considered significant evidence linking Torsten to the crime. At home, the Torsten used chloroform to incapacitate the Stephanie before assaulting her. Chloroform is a powerful sedative that can linger in the body after inhalation, but its effects don't last long if the person is alive. Experts believe that Stephanie died from inhaling too much chloroform, which led to poisoning. During the investigation, police discovered a bag containing suspicious items, as well as another woman's handbag in the car. Inside the handbag, they found documents that helped them identify the owner. She was an 18-year-old girl who fortunately survived her encounter with the Torsten. The victim explained that she had met Torsten by chance in the parking lot, exchanged a brief greeting, and then continued on her way. She later found herself waking up in an unfamiliar van. According to her statements, she did not suffer an overdose and survived the incident. Luckily, the girl was able to identify her attacker. The second victim also reported that she was not harmed. She escaped after regaining consciousness from chloroform. At that time, Torsten was absent from the vehicle, allowing her to flee through an unlocked back door and disappear. Torsten has been charged with the assault on this girl, but suspicions around him persisted after Stephanie's body was discovered on an abandoned farm. Forensic experts conducted thorough examinations of the remains and the site. They found evidence indicating that the killer had been in close proximity to the decomposing body for over a month. This was further supported by specially trained dogs that accurately detected Torsten's scent. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Torsten refused to admit his guilt. In order to get Torsten to talk, one of the police officers agreed to share a cell with him. While in the same cell, the officer quickly developed a rapport with Torsten and managed to get a recorded confession from him. Torsten admitted to killing Stephanie but claimed it was an accident. He explained that they met in her apartment after she returned from a party. He had been watching her for some time, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, he felt the right moment had come. Stephanie was drunk and her family was asleep, so he decided to make his move. Torsten began to harass Stephanie, who tried to fight him off. This led to an argument between them. He did not go into details but claimed that Stephanie had attacked him first. In response, he pushed her, causing her to hit her head and lose consciousness. Surprisingly, he never mentioned the anesthetic found in her system. Torsten panicked and quickly moved Stephanie's body from the apartment to an abandoned farmhouse. He stayed with the body, worried about being discovered, until he finally decided to flee to Germany. His story seemed unbelievable because Stephanie had no head injuries, suggesting he had lied about how the death occurred. It was also strange that Stephanie's relatives did not immediately suspect the neighbor who had gone missing around the time of Stephanie's murder. For years after the murder, the prosecutor's office finally charged Torsten with assault resulting in death. The charge carries a 10-year prison sentence, and the prosecutor's office sought the maximum sentence. However, Torsten's attorney argued that his confession had been improperly obtained, meaning the recording could not be used to support the charges. The defense argued that Stephanie's body had been accidentally contaminated with chloroform after the autopsy. While this explanation seemed implausible, it was important to disprove it through further investigation. Ultimately, the accidental chloroform contamination theory was rejected. Forensic experts determined that the chloroform levels in Stephanie's blood were too high to be accidental. It was concluded that Torsten had intentionally poisoned Stephanie to prevent her from reporting her to the police. The prosecutor's office also asserted that Torsten's confession had been obtained legally, which was sufficient to file charges. The Torsten was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder and exhibited clear narcissistic traits. His lawyer asked for leniency, arguing that Torsten had a troubled childhood. His parents separated shortly after he was born, and he grew up in a challenging environment. He experienced several abusive stepfathers and was ultimately abandoned by his mother. Frequent moves and changes of schools made it difficult for him to form lasting relationships. Torsten had no close friends and described his relationships with others as non-existent. His mother occasionally reappeared in his life, only to vanish again. The lawyer explained that these experiences negatively impacted Torsten's early life. He had no understanding of kindness, love, or parental care, which contributed to his antisocial behavior. He frequently found himself in trouble and often acted as a bully, leading to constant conflicts. Following the initial hearings, Torsten received a 10-year prison sentence, the maximum allowed. Both Torsten and his lawyer disagreed with this ruling. The lawyer continued to fight for Torsten and succeeded in getting the case reviewed. The judge ruled that the confession obtained illegally would not be considered evidence. The jury found Torsten guilty of premeditated murder and added another year for concealing evidence. The prosecutor's office convincingly demonstrated that the killer had been waiting for his victim in her apartment. She had returned home, changed into her pajamas, and was getting ready for bed when he attacked her, raped her, and then killed her to cover up his crime. To hide Stephanie's body, the Torsten took her to a nearby farm. There, Torsten lived close to the body for over a month, constantly fearing that he would be discovered. During this period, he took part in all the search efforts, was present at almost every search operation, and provided significant support to the family of Stephanie. All of this was intended to distract suspicion away from him. Until the criminal was finally caught, the family of Stephanie had no idea that they had welcomed a man into their home who had escaped from prison in another country. He was wanted for multiple robberies and had also been accused of sexually assaulting another girl using chloroform. In prison, Torsten behaved well and even assisted the priest. He completed his sentence and was released after 11 years. Stephanie's family wanted a harsher punishment and were disappointed with the leniency of his sentence. The police in both Spain and Germany, who were involved in the joint investigation, shared their concerns. They viewed Torsten as a potential threat, fearing that it was only a matter of time before he would attack again, possibly leading to more rapes and murders. Torsten is currently living in Germany, but his exact location and identity remain unknown. And he has not been involved in any new criminal activities, at least for now. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the heartbreaking case of a beautiful woman, Julie Scully. Julie Marie Scully, an American woman, gave up everything to pursue love, but just a few months later, her body was found in a horrific state in a remote lake in Turkey. What turned her beautiful life into an international sensation case? Let's follow the case today. Julie was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. To understand her story better, let's consider her parents' situation. Julia was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation in New Mexico, home to the second largest Native American tribe in the United States. Life on the reservation was extremely challenging, with no electricity or running water and limited job opportunities due to widespread alcoholism. Many residents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. At the age of 12, Julia's parents sent her to a boarding school to help her learn English and adapt to life outside the reservation. After moving to the city, she began to fit in as an average American, and found work at a mental health facility. However, she became addicted to substances. Later, Julia met a police officer named John. They got married just 2 days before the 1-year anniversary of their meeting. John took a job as a patrolman in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. In January 1969, Julia became pregnant, and they welcomed their daughter, Julie. As Julie grew, she formed a very close bond with her father, and relatives noted that she would do anything to earn his approval. Father and daughter spent a lot of time together fishing, while Julia often felt sidelined in family life. During these times, she struggled with feelings of being an outsider. Although Julia hid her substance addiction, her erratic behavior raised concerns among those around her. Things worsened as Julia began to use more potent illegal additives. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, Julie's brother, John Patrick Scully, was born. The new baby quickly became the center of attention for their parents, leaving Julie feeling unloved and neglected. Meanwhile, Julia's substance abuse continued, and she fell into a deep depression. In 1973, overwhelmed, she took an entire pack of sleeping pills. Fortunately, John found her in time, administered first aid, and called for medical help. Julia was revived, but not only did the family learn of her addiction, the situation deteriorated further. She began to resemble a shell of her former self. Soon after, Julia attempted self-harm again due to depression, but this time, she also was saved. The issues between her parents did not go unnoticed by their children, especially by Julie, who was 9 years old at the time. During her birthday party, friends gathered to celebrate, but in the middle of the festivities, their father left to see his mistress. He had been having an affair for a while, viewing it as an escape from his growing disgust for his dependent wife. He stayed with Julia only for the sake of the children. During the party, the mistress arrived at their home to pick up John, and Julie saw her leaving with him. He seemed completely unconcerned that his secret was now obvious. This revelation hit Julie hard, and Julia began to blame herself for the situation. Julia struggled to understand what was really happening. During this time, Julie had once been an excellent student, started to fall to a C average in school. John then decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington. In here, Julie, a bright and beautiful girl, became very popular, but also fell in with a bad crowd. She started skipping school, and her grades continued to decline. By this time, she was 12 years old and already looked attractive, attracting the attention of many boys. All this was aggravated by the fact that their family lived in a disadvantaged area, which made her parents increasingly afraid for Julie, fearing she could become a victim of the addiction. One evening, Julie's friends were supposed to spend the night, but when the mother came to check on them, the schoolgirls were not in the room. Concerned, Julia contacted emergency services, and the police eventually located them in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother was deteriorating, resulting in frequent arguments. Her rebellious behavior also troubled her father. Julia entered treatment for her addiction. During Julia's absence, the home environment became more peaceful. However, despite Julie's early attempts to please her father, her rebellious nature intensified. She continued to skip classes and perform poorly academically due to spending more time with friends. When John learned of this, he was very upset. At the age of 14, Julie informed her father that she wanted to drop out of school. This decision likely stemmed from her feeling ignored by her parents. She was attractive and often the center of attention at parties, making her prioritize fun over her father's approval. By the age of 14, Julie had started living a sexual life. After graduating from high school, her parents began considering her future and special education needs. John helped her gain admission to a prestigious engineering school, known for its strict selection process. He personally spoke to the director to ensure she would be accepted without facing competition, emphasizing that she was the daughter of an indigenous person, which he hoped would earn her some concessions. In the fall of 1983, his efforts succeeded, and Julie enrolled in the engineering program. Meanwhile, her brother chose a different path. He joined the Navy as soon as he turned 16. During this time, Julie decided she was content with her life and dropped out of school to pursue financial independence. She began working and soon met a boyfriend. He was 6 years older than her. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married in November 1985, just a few months before Julie turned 18. Although marrying provided her with financial support and emotional stability, their union was kept secret, even from her father. When John eventually found out, he supported the marriage, believing it was a better choice for Julie than living with a dependent parent. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in 1988, and Julie had to move back in with her mother. Despite finding a new job, she did not contribute to her mother's living expenses. Julie became more beautiful than ever, attracting attention every time she was in public. Many people even mistook her for a model and often asked if she was one. Over time, she started to leverage her beauty. Though she felt fragile and vulnerable inside, she was desperately searching for love, but only found brief connections. Many men invited her out on dates and to various events. This trend continued in July 1989, when she attended a stylish party at a yacht owners club. There, she met Timothy "Tim" Nist, a man 11 years her senior. He was a successful businessman who owned his own yacht. In the early 1980s, he started a landscape design company, and his business thrived during the boom of the U.S. real estate market. Julie and Tim's relationship progressed rapidly, but it soon became evident that Julie was very jealous. One day, when Tim was at a bar with another girl, Julie arrived and immediately hit him, leaving a bruise on his face. She also attacked the girl, who was actually Tim's longtime secretary and just an employee helping with the business. Although the situation was tense, the conflict was eventually resolved. Besides, Julie aspired to be a model and saw an advertisement for a beauty contest in a newspaper. Eager to participate, she and Tim gathered her best photos to submitted them to the magazine hosting the contest. Unfortunately, they later discovered that the contest was a scam. The magazine used fake ads to collect free photos for their men's section, which was on the last page. One day, Tim arrived at his office to find his secretary absent. To his surprise, Julie was sitting at her desk with a friendly smile, claiming that the secretary would no longer come to work and that Julie had taken over her job. This arrangement allowed Julie to work from home, giving her more freedom and financial independence. Meanwhile, she kept checking her email to see if another magazine had responded to the beauty pageant, but there was no response at all, which made her very frustrated. Eventually, feeling cheated out of her prize, she went to a magazine's office and confronted the editor, demanding an explanation for the lack of recognition for her supposed win. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to include them in the next issue. Julie told everyone about what happened and began to prepare for the competition, which later took place in an elite hotel. At the contest, 12 finalists participated, including Julie. Unfortunately, the judges selected other contestants and only one person voted for her. Despite this setback, Julie formed a friendship with Cheryl Chuplis Hood, the magazine editor, and became this magazine's face, appearing on billboards throughout the city. This exposure increased her popularity, leading to numerous modeling job offers. Julie quickly gained fame, and her career flourished until the fall of 1990. She continued to work for SEMA while winning awards in smaller beauty contests. However, failures awaited her on the big podium. On November 16, 1991, Julie married Tim when she was 23 years old. They enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and did not deny themselves anything until 1997. Julie's modeling career continued to grow, leading to more income and television appearances. However, she also began to struggle with alcohol abuse. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but overall, they shared love and understanding. Tim wanted children, and they had the financial means to support a family, but Julie was hesitant, fearing it might jeopardize her modeling career. In February 1995, she became pregnant. Despite her friends' concerns, she continued to drink and smoke during this time. On November 26, 1996, she gave birth to a daughter named Katie, which profoundly transformed her life, which Julie willingly accepted. During this time, Julia overcame her addictions and started to actively support her granddaughter. However, they frequently argued about parenting. Soon after, Julie began to struggle with postpartum depression, feeling unhappy because her pregnancy had affected her figure. She became withdrawn and didn't make an effort to return to her former self. Around the same time, her relationship with Tim started to deteriorate, especially in April of that year. They were compelled to see a family psychologist. Julie felt that the therapist favored Tim, but the therapist was actually trying to help her confront her issues and past traumas. Ultimately, the psychologist concluded that Tim was not spending enough time with Julie, putting their marriage at risk. Julie felt lonely and started reaching out to her friends. She came home intoxicated on November 1. This is the 7th year of Tim's annual cruise tradition, which they had maintained since their wedding. This year, they decided to move the trip up to celebrate the Christmas holidays. The cruise was intended to strengthen Julie and Tim's relationship. They left Katie with her grandparents and flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, a man named George Skiadopoulos, who worked in the ship's engineering department, noticed Julie. Although he held a low-ranking position, he introduced himself as the captain. The next day, he had made a bet with a friend that he could start a romantic relationship with Julie. At just 22 years old and fresh out of college, George was at the beginning of his engineering career, but he looked respectable enough for Julie to believe him. He falsely claimed to be 28 and fabricated a few accomplishments to impress her. At that time, Julie was 29 years old, and she quickly became close to George. Tim noticed their interactions but was accustomed to Julie being friendly with strangers, so he didn't think much of it and felt no jealousy. Before a party, George offered Julie a tour of the engine room. During the tour, they shared a kiss, but nothing more happened afterward. When Julie returned home, she excitedly told a family friend about her feelings, thinking it was just a brief attraction, since she believed she would never see George again. However, not long after, George sent Julie a seemingly innocent letter, and they began talking on the phone daily. He tried to persuade her that Tim wasn't good enough for her. These conversations were not hidden from Tim. He caught Julie a few times while she was on the phone, but chose to trust her without questioning what they discussed. This situation left Julie feeling conflicted. She was torn between the stability of the family and new sensations with a young lover whom she missed so much, which caused her to become more distant from her husband and daughter. Noticing the change in her behavior, Tim grew concerned and wanted to mend their relationship. On January 3, 1941, he planned a surprise birthday party for her 30th birthday. The celebration went well, with many friends attending. During the party, Julie requested another cruise as a gift, specifying a particular ship and date. Tim was unaware of her true intentions to meet George again. He agreed to her request. On February 13, Julie went on a cruise where she met George. After some intimate moments and returning home, Julie excitedly shared her experience with her friend Tony, who is also the godfather of Katie. Although he was trustworthy, it was hard for Tony to keep this secret to himself. Feeling a deep longing for George, Julie decided to visit him secretly. She framed the trip as a vacation with her mother and daughter. She revealed to her mother about her secret relationship, which led to disapproval. But this could not stop Julie. Initially, the plan was for Julie, Julia, and Katie to go to Florida together. However, by March 26, she left them behind and traveled to Puerto Rico, where she betrayed love of her husband. Upon returning, Julie began to communicate more openly with George. She would frequently talk to him on the phone, send flirty love letters via email, and even create a video sharing snippets of her life. All of this she did without hiding it from Tim, with whom she still lived. Using her husband's earnings, she started going to parties and drinking regularly. Tim noticed these changes and suggested that they see a family psychologist after 7 years of marriage. One day, Julie expressed her desire to break up with Tim, but he opposed the idea. She owned a share in Tim's business, which was generating about $1 million annually. Julie was in dire need of finances as George was planning military service, which in Greece lasts 20 months. She attempted to help George obtain a visa to the USA, but by that time, she could no longer afford it. Struggling with emotional issues, she started taking antidepressants, which made George very angry, and he forbade her from continuing the medication. To impress her new boyfriend, Julie decided to get in shape. However, she had trouble sleeping due to taking sleeping pills and other strong medications, which led her to lose about 10 kg. She hoped to return to modeling to earn money, but George was very jealous and opposed her pursuing this career. Consequently, Julie had to abandon her plans. No one supported her relationship with this Greek man, not even Cheryl, who had previously shown interest in her. In a separate incident, Tim was unable to access a project document. When Julie refused to let him into her room, he had to call the police for help. Despite her resistance, he retrieved what he needed for work. Julie became paranoid, believing that Tim had hired a detective to spy on her. The tension in their home escalated, and it seemed inevitable that they were heading toward a divorce. By midsummer, George and Julie secretly got engaged while they were in the United States. This was done secretly, although she didn't hide from anyone that she was going to move to Greece. During this time, Tim started receiving monthly bills of $67 for international phone calls. Eventually, he discovered that she had been unfaithful to him by an engineer from a cruise ship, and they had been communicating with him behind his back. This revelation made Tim furious, and he decided to expedite the divorce process to eliminate any complications. In response, Julie attempted to restrict Tim's communication with Katie. She aimed to gain full custody so she could leave for another country without any obstacles, which Tim strongly opposed. While they was trying to resolve their issues, Julie's lover George informed her that he had quit his job and planned to visit her in New Jersey. During this time, Julie was under significant stress due to ongoing conflicts with Tim, which even caused her hair to start falling out. However, she believed that all this was due to separation from her beloved. Additionally, she became increasingly paranoid and jealous, demanding constant communication and obsessing over other women in George's life. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship took on a more chaotic tone. He frequently asked Julie for money, pressuring her to spend more than she could afford. Because of this, she was forced to take money from Tim, while she completely limited him communication with their daughter. Tim went weeks without seeing her, which drove him to frustration. Meanwhile, George constantly deceived Julie about his financial situation and employment status. It was surprising how unattractive this man was, the beautiful Julie, who literally crouched before him and was ready to give up her well-established life for him. Julie's friends and family were puzzled by her behavior. They tried to convince her to rethink her feelings, as they couldn't comprehend why she would fall for a bald, unemployed man with rotten teeth who was manipulative, deceitful, and excessively jealous. Despite their concerns, Julie seemed infatuated with him. She planned to use her divorce settlement to pay for a professional hair transplant for her boyfriend and fix her own teeth. When Tim learned about her plans, he was outraged, especially since he felt Julie was involving Katie in this situation. He threatened that if she attempted to leave, he would take Katie away, and she would never see their child again. This threat likely dampened Julie's enthusiasm momentarily. She even told her friends that she had ended her relationship with George. However, this was only a temporary setback. A few weeks later, she went to Greece with George to further develop their relationship. During this time, Julie met the parents of George, and they enjoyed the weekend. Because of the religious views of the boyfriend's parents, Julie was forced to hide her marriage and her daughter, as well as her modeling past. When she returned home, she dreamed of a future with her lover. On December 1st, she planned to leave Tim and their shared home. That day, she also left Katie and checked into a hotel. After using a significant amount of psychoactive drugs, Julie traveled to Greece on December 8, 1998. While there, she and her partner made plans for marriage and their life together. George convinced her to open a joint bank account, claiming she needed help with the language barrier. In her infatuation, Julie deposited $80,000 into the account and left an additional $18,000 in cash for expenses. This was all the money she had, and then she vanished without a trace. On January 8, George called Julie's friend to report that she was missing. He said she was supposed to meet him near McDonald's for a snack but never arrived, despite him waiting for several hours. At that time, they didn't have mobile phones to reach her. After a lengthy search, George contacted the police to report his fiancée's disappearance. Shortly before these events, Julie called her friend to express how much she missed Katie and to share that she was having issues with her fiancé, George. The friend sensed that Julie was considering leaving George, and she thought that Julie would return to the US soon. However, Julie never came back. Amid this, George's call was concerning. He informed her friend that Julie had disappeared and left her passport in the car, which the police later took. The problem was that George couldn't locate the officer who had taken the document, making his story seem suspicious. In response, the friend contacted Tim, who was the only one who could provide assistance. Tim quickly understood that Julie was in trouble. The last time she had reached out to her family in the US was on January 7, and since then, no one had heard from her. Julie's mother described George as pathetic. Not only was he unattractive, but he also seemed to lack self-control. There was an incident where George became aggressive towards Julie, when during an argument with Julie, he yelled at her, grabbed her by the throat, and pushed her against the wall. He only released her when he heard the threat of police involvement. At this time, Julie attempted to end the relationship. Following this, Julia called the police, and George was deported. But then, despite the circumstances, Julie traveled to Greece to support her boyfriend. She defended him in every way possible, even taking responsibility for the attack. When she learned that Julie was missing, Julia suspected that her daughter's boyfriend was involved in her disappearance. George pretended to help with the search for Julie. During this time, Julie's family tried to reach the American embassy in Athens, but they faced a significant language barrier since no one at the Greek police stations involved in the investigation spoke English. In the United States, the FBI became involved in the case. It was revealed that Julie's passport had been with George the entire time, although he claimed he found it later. When George learned that the FBI was now investigating, he changed his story and said that Julie's documents had been stolen. His behavior grew increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unsuccessful. The couple was scheduled to get married on January 23, 1999. During this time, news outlets were covering the story of the missing American woman. George became agitated when he spoke on the phone with Julie's friend, who had alerted the media, George insisting he was innocent. He even gave statements to the press and participated in interviews to defend himself. 16 days later, George, the main suspect, was in the interrogation room. He continued to stick to the story he had shared with the media. However, after 4 hours of questioning, the police got him to confess to killing his lover. He claimed that it was an accident. George seemed to genuinely regret the incident, even shedding tears during the interrogation. Despite this, his account was filled with inconsistencies. At times, he insisted that Julie had not disappeared, only to later admit his guilt and then deny any involvement again. George explained that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became unhappy and missed her home. She expressed a strong desire to return, and despite George's attempts to support her, her distress only deepened, which worried him. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Julie was constantly in tears. Furthermore, George's mother discovered that Julie had an ex-husband and a daughter in America, which made her feel disgusted with Julie. She openly expressed her disapproval to George. He was ultimately persuaded by his mother to leave Julie with such a complicated past. Their relationship was fraught with arguments, and they eventually were evicted from their hotel due to their conflicts. However, George exacerbated the situation. He prevented her from contacting her family and friends, and physically abused her. It became evident that his mother struggled with schizophrenia and frequently required hospitalization. A lot of her issues seemed to have been passed down to George, who had an inflated sense of self-worth. As a result, he exhibited arrogant behavior. His manipulative tendencies were often noticed by friends and family. He disappeared at the slightest disagreement and immediately attacked his beloved. Besides, there was an incident where George's mother herself had a badly injured hand. But she justified herself by saying that she accidentally cut herself. Despite the abuse, Julie remained in the relationship. On January 8, 1999, the couple embarked on a long trip to Athens. As they drove along a deserted two-lane highway, their calm conversation spiraled into another argument. George eventually stopped in a remote area of the road where they were isolated from other drivers. George got out of the car and immediately attacked Julie, choking her in an attempt to silence her screams. George later told the police that it felt like he was watching the incident from outside his body. He felt completely powerless and couldn't stop until Julie showed no signs of life. Although he claimed the attack lasted only a few seconds, forensic experts indicated that strangulation typically takes at least 3 minutes. Afterward, George was in shock and contemplated burning her body and scattering the ashes into the sea from a cliff, intending to jump afterward to be with her. However, he ultimately abandoned this plan. Instead, he found himself in an interrogation room, which revealed his guilt. George claimed he had tried to take his own life using an air gun, jumping in front of a truck, and through an overdose of medication, but he was unsuccessful. Following the murder, he treated her body with indifference. He placed her in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he purchased gasoline. He then returned to the scene, dragged her body away from the road near 2 small lakes, poured gasoline on her, and attempted to set her on fire. However, the fire didn't ignite because it started to rain. At one point, he thought about throwing her body into the lake, but instead placed the charred remains back in the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. George discovered a large suitcase intended for travel and decided to pack the body inside it. By this time, rigor mortis had already set in, and the body would not bend. Additionally, the head would not fit into the suitcase, so George resorted to cutting it off. He grabbed the head by the hair and raised it to the level of his face, and later confessed to the police that he was horrified by the sight of her vacant eyes. Yet he still found her beautiful. He kissed her on the lips before placing the body into the suitcase. Afterward, he burned the suitcase and discarded it in a swamp, leaving the head behind. George then traveled to Kavala and threw Julie's head into the Aegean Sea. Tim and his family were informed of George's confession 19 days after Julie's disappearance. George, Julie's lover and intended husband, guided detectives to the murder site, where they discovered her remains. Tim traveled to Greece to bring her body back to her homeland. During this time, George confessed to the crime on live television. His mother suffered a stroke upon learning of his actions. Tim's father even remarked that George should have died alongside Julie. Despite this, many articles unfairly blamed Julie for the tragedy. Greek authorities described this murder as one of the most horrific cases known at the time. George's lawyers attempted to argue that he was insane, citing his mother's schizophrenia as a possible reason for his mental state. At one point, George expressed a desire for the death penalty, but Greece does not have capital punishment. In the United States, Tim became a source of support for Julie's family and friends. Despite Julie's infidelity, he proved to be a decent person. Friends of Julie, who remembered her fondly, believed that George initially exploited her for financial gain. When he found out that her husband was rich, he forced her to divorce for a tidy sum that the woman had to invest in his business. Before her death, Julie realized George's true intentions and decided not to invest in his projects, a decision that ultimately cost her life. George's trial began on November 27, 1999. Since 2009, cases in Greece have been heard by 3 judges instead of juries, which has expedited the justice process. Notably, no defense witnesses were present during the hearings. On December 6, the court found George guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it seemed that justice had been served, the Greek legal system faltered. In 2002, George appealed his conviction, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. His sentence was subsequently reduced to 23 years, and he was granted the right to appeal again. By 2007, he was released and now lives with his new family in Kavala. The case of Julie Scully is a heartbreaking tragedy, with haunting details of the complex relationship. From a happy marriage, she began an affair with George Skiadopoulos, which led to irreparable arguments and conflicts that eventually led to her death. The case is not only a story of personal loss, but also a reflection of the complex elements of love, trust, and power in relationships. The media and public continue to investigate to clarify what really happened, but the story of Julie will forever be a painful reminder of the tragic consequences of toxic relationships. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Cher Lynn Hughes. Cher Hughes is a businesswoman in her 50s. Her husband, Keith Whirl, is 3 years younger than her. They are both from Florida and quickly fell in love with the tropical Bocas del Toro. They decided to move to Panama to start a new life. After living there for 6 months, they purchased a plot of land and built a small hotel called Casa del Sapa, which they both directly managed. Thanks to Cher and Keith's business acumen, they developed the hotel into a success. But they didn't stop there. Using her savings, Cher gradually acquired 4 additional properties to expand her business. One day, she excitedly told Keith that she had purchased an entire island. She loved the area so much that she couldn't help herself. She wanted to keep buying more properties and make it her permanent home. Together, they created their dream haven. Cher and Keith appeared deeply connected and were often referred to as Ken and Barbie for their harmonious relationship. It seemed they had a bright and happy future ahead of them. Sadly, Cher's fate was tragic. Although she was unable to have children, she always longed to be a mother. For years she underwent treatments and tried tirelessly to conceive, but her efforts were unsuccessful. However, she fulfilled her dream of becoming a mother by caring for and helping the local children on the island. She regularly bought them uniforms, school supplies, organized themed parties, boat trips, and fun events. The children loved her very much and called her Mrs. Cher. After a period of living on the island, Keith and Cher divorced. Keith began a new relationship with another woman, also an immigrant from the United States. Despite being betrayed, Cher still did not let herself fall. Determined to move forward, she mends her relationship with her sister Judy, whom she had not talked to much recently. To mark this fresh start, Cher planned a small gathering, inviting Judy and a few close friends. The intimate event was meant to help her heal, forget her husband, and found solace after their divorce. Cher had bought her sister Judy's ticket a month ago and was eager to see her again. Judy happily accepted her invitation and looked forward to the reunion. Judy missed her younger sister very much and was eager to mend their relationship. However, as Judy prepared for the trip, she abruptly stopped communicating. Over the next several days, she did not reply to messages or answer calls. Oddly, new posts appeared on her social network, but they were just recycled content from the past. This behavior seemed strange and somewhat alarming. Judy tried to find out why Cher ignored her, but all her questions went unanswered. Cher not only ignored Judy, but also all of her family and friends, who had also made repeated attempts to contact her. Growing increasingly concerned, Judy contacted Keith. However, he was cold and indifferent. He said that he was divorced from Cher. He claimed he had no idea where she was and made it clear that he had no plans to reconcile with or search for her. Cher's family thought this was unusual. They began checking her social media pages and contacting her acquaintances. Judy sent messages to nearly everyone Cher knew, explaining her disappearance, but no one had any significant information. About 10 days later, they received a message from Cher's account. In the message, Cher said she was relaxing with a man, but did not reveal his name. She also mentioned that the two were planning to go on a cruise. However, this explanation seemed confusing and out of character for Cher. Judy's worries grew stronger. Is there something fishy behind her seemingly normal divorce from Keith? His behavior had been strange, rude, and disrespectful, making Judy suspect he's hiding something. Cher's silence only makes Judy more worried. She started to fear that her sister might be in danger or even the victim of a crime. Determined to find answers, Judy contacted a friend of Cher's, Payne Thor, for help in the search. However, he wasn't able to find any useful leads. After 2 weeks of searching, he finally reported Cher's disappearance to the police. The case quickly attracted attention, thanks to Judy's frequent activity on social media. Moreover, during the 6 months she lived on the islands building her business, Cher became famous. She played an important role in the community, supporting children and people in difficulty. Hundreds of people were willing to help her family and find out the truth about her disappearance. However, the law enforcement system on the islands is very rudimentary. Despite their good intentions, the police department lacks both the resources and the capacity to investigate the case effectively. They questioned her acquaintances, but assumed that she was simply spending time with friends or that she had met a new man. When they learned that Cher was allegedly planning to go on a yacht, they accepted this theory and decided to close the case. Cher's family, who lived more than 2,000 kilometers away, were shocked and desperate. They contacted the U.S. Embassy in Panama to pressure the local police to speed up the investigation. The police received documents related to the case. Unsurprisingly, the first suspect was Cher's ex-husband Keith, who was summoned for questioning. He is ready to provide any information to exonerate himself as soon as possible. As the media covered the case, rumors began to circulate. Some accused Keith of being a cruel tyrant who mistreated Cher and was unfaithful to her. Many even suspected him of being involved in her disappearance. They had first met in Florida in 1993, when she visited Keith's bar. From the first moment, he was attracted to her, and so was she. After starting her own business, Cher set a goal to earn $1 million before moving on to new ventures, and she succeeded. Once she reached her goal, she and Keith relocated to the islands of Bocas del Toro. They loved it and decided to settle there. Their relationship grew stronger, and in 2005, they held a small wedding ceremony in the presence of close friends and family. In the timeline leading up to Cher's disappearance, detectives found it suspicious that she vanished soon after her divorce from Keith. They speculated that the two incidents might be connected and suspected that Keith knew more than he admitted. However, he has consistently denied any involvement in her disappearance. He claims they divorced amicably, despite Cher's feelings of hurt. He insisted he had no motive to harm her, as he stood to gain nothing. There was no inheritance or insurance payout involved. Their relationship had been legally dissolved. He also provided an alibi for the period of Cher's disappearance, but this was complicated by the fact that the exact time she went missing was unclear. Cher lived alone, and no one could determine precisely when she had disappeared. The investigation was further complicated by the belief among locals that Cher, a kind and well-liked person, could not have had enemies or quarrels with anyone. However, police received information from several witnesses that she had gone on a cruise with a man before her disappearance. The witnesses did not know who this man was. There was also evidence that she had sold all of her possessions to a man named Wild Bill before she disappeared. This was suspicious, as she had been waiting for her sister Judy to arrive and had no plans to leave the area. Furthermore, she did not say goodbye to anyone before she disappeared, which was very strange for someone who was so well connected and friendly with the local community. Wild Bill turned out to be a neighbor and friend of Cher. When questioned, he claimed that she had voluntarily sold her assets to him because she had fallen in love with a new man and decided to give up all her work. His explanation convinced the detectives. They verified the details and prepared to close the case. However, Cher's family does not accept this conclusion. They do not know where she is, and she has not contacted them. Unable to go to Panama themselves, the family asks the police to continue the investigation and seeks the assistance of a local journalist named Don Winner. Don Winner, a journalist for a news site for the expat community in Panama, is fluent in both English, Spanish, and is well-versed in handling complex situations on the islands. He decides to conduct an investigation to help the Hughes family seek justice. When he takes on the case, he is provided with a copy of the police report and other relevant data. During the investigation, he quickly realizes that Cher had no intention of leaving the country. This is puzzling, since a celebrity like Cher would not have disappeared without a trace. As Don continued his investigation, he discovered that Cher was not alone in Bocas del Toro's disappearance. Just 4 months earlier, a 58-year-old antique dealer named Bo Islar had also mysteriously disappeared. Cher and Bo knew each other. Although their personalities were different, she was outgoing and outgoing. He was more reserved. The important thing they had in common was that they had both sold their properties to Wild Bill shortly before they disappeared. Wild then put them up for sale. Bo's family believed he had moved to Argentina, so they did not actively search for him. However, the disappearance of both Bo and Cher raised concerns that there might be a serial killer operating on the islands, kidnapping, or even murdering people. This caused panic and fear in the local community. Don continued to investigate and began to suspect that Wild was involved. After Cher's disappearance, he often hosted parties at her house, which was quite unusual. He did not even remove her picture from the wall, which gave off a creepy feeling. Furthermore, He hired someone to renovate her house and then sold it for a higher price. Don believed he was on the right track and began gathering more information about Wild Bill. Witnesses said he owned a gun, which was illegal in Panama. They said they saw him carrying it and heard bullets from time to time. This testimony gave the police a good reason to investigate. Don turned over all the information he had gathered to the police, and they found the evidence compelling. Police obtained a search warrant for Wild's home. During the search, they discovered a grisly collection of Nazi symbols, horror memorabilia, and jars of human teeth and crowns. They also found a large cache of weapons and ammunition. He was apparently obsessed with horror movies, owning a large collection of them, including videos of real-life murders on the dark web. Among the items seized was Cher's handbag, which contained her documents and several credit cards. They also found a cell phone and several personal items belonging to Beau, who had gone missing earlier. However, neither Wild nor his wife were home at the time. Investigators found Cher's dog at her house. When police tried to take the dog away, it kept returning to the house. Each time they took the dog on a boat 1 kilometer away from shore, it jumped off, swam back to shore, and ran straight home. Finally, the dog led them to a location in Wild's backyard. They assumed the dog was trying to point something out, so they decided to search the area. Meanwhile, workers who had renovated Wild's house before selling it were called in for questioning. One of them revealed that Wild had asked him to dig a hole in the backyard to bury his trash. The worker pointed out the exact location, and excavation was scheduled for the next day. During the excavation, investigators discovered the body of a woman in her 40s. Based on the condition of the remains, she had been buried for approximately 3 to 4 months. Dental records confirmed that it was the body of Cher, who had gone missing. Beau's body was also found in the same pit, but in a more advanced state of decomposition, having been buried longer. A third body was discovered nearby, but identification was difficult because the head was missing. The remains were found one after another, one skeleton after another. In total, 5 bodies were found, but the identities of 3 of them remain unknown. Investigators soon turned their attention to Wild. They uncovered that his real name was William Dathan Holbert, a 30-year-old man from North Carolina, USA. In 2007, he moved to the area with his second wife, Laura Michelle Reese. He had an extensive criminal history and was wanted in 6 states for various offenses. Neighbors described them as noisy and annoying. His wife, who introduced herself as Gina Cortez, was considered rude and odd. They rarely appeared in public except when attending parties at bars. Gina claimed to be a veterinarian, but when a neighbor sought her help with a dog, she was unable to provide assistance. She explained that her expertise was in large farm animals, like horses and cattle. This has raised doubts about the authenticity of her words. William Dathan Holbert, known as Wild, was the only child in his family. His father worked for a company that manufactured agricultural machinery. He grew up in a beautiful 2-story house, was well educated, and participated in sports regularly. He seemed to have a promising future. He married his first wife, Ryan, in 1998 at just 18 years old. Within a year, they had their first child. Over the next 4 years, they had 2 more children. During that time, he does design work, and his wife was a housewife. After his father died, Wild and his family moved back to his parents' house and took over the management of the family farm. At this time, neighbors, friends, and relatives began to notice that Wild had become extremely angry. Many believed that this could be due to his steroid use, but there were also signs that he had mental health problems. He often lost control and attacked his wife and children. His wife Ryan was very concerned about these changes, especially when Wild, for unknown reasons, wanted to kill the family's healthy and docile dog. Despite his protests, His wife took the dog to the vet, but the vet refused. In a fit of rage, he killed the dog in front of his children and dumped the body. This action shocked and saddened his family and neighbors. During this time, Wilde's business ventures and his father's farm failed. Then he decided to enter politics. He bought some business suits and announced his candidacy for mayor. However, his strange and aggressive behavior caused gossip, and no one took his political ambitions seriously. Despite this, he remained confident and believed he could win. Unfortunately, an incident involving his dog further tarnished his reputation and ended any hopes of a political career. In 2003, Wilde met the Hoover family at a fitness center he frequented. He made an impression as a successful businessman. Unaware of Wilde's previous failed ventures, the Hoover family decided to buy a third gym in 2004 and put him in charge. This was an opportunity for him to prove his ability, but he managed it ineffectively and could not buy the necessary training equipment on time. Instead, he rented an apartment near the gym, which was only a few minutes' drive from his home. He lived there with his mistress, Laura, while maintaining the facade of a normal family life with his wife and children. By 2004, Wilde's wife, Ryan, discovered that he was having an affair with Laura, which led to the breakdown of his family. Around the same time, he secretly to sell the Hoover family gym. This came to light in 2005 when he filed for bankruptcy. After leaving, he left behind tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills, loans, and debts. Despite having a monthly income of about $1,600, he was spending up to $4,000 each month. Later, his lover, Laura, opened a Russian-themed bookstore. However, this store also quickly failed. Wilde lived in Santa Fe for a while and worked on various projects. However, he began to run into trouble when he was caught selling culturally valuable items, which turned out to be stolen. After being arrested, he escaped. He and Laura escaped from the police in an SUV. They drove through fields and down dirt roads. They eventually made it to Florida, where they boarded a cruise ship and continued their escape by getting off the ship in Panama. In Panama, they started a business selling motorcycle parts. He began using the pseudonym Ulf, despite being one of America's most wanted criminals. At the time, he was about 20 years old. Interestingly, photos of him from this period show him completely bald. On the islands, however, he grew out his hair to better conceal his identity. During this time, he actively sought advice from lawyers and experts in Panama's legal system, paying particular attention to the procedures required to purchase and register real estate. After buying their first house, they converted it into a bar named Private. There, they hosted parties and invited everyone to join them. Wilde and Laura openly promoted their bar, even placing ads in the local newspaper. However, neighbors were puzzled as to how the bar was kept afloat, as it was clearly not profitable. When questioned about his source of income, he simply replied that he was a millionaire and that he worked for fun. Over time, he began buying and reselling items. Eventually, it was revealed that he was murdering people to seize their property, allowing him to amass a large sum of money and live a comfortable life. As news of Wilde's dark past spread, many local residents fled their homes. Some speculated that he could escape by boat, while others thought he might flee by plane. The remote islands made it easy for him to escape, and with his wealth he could hide anywhere in the world. Forensic experts quickly determined that Cher and Beau had both been killed with a weapon to the head at close range. 3 more bodies were later identified as the Brown family, immigrants from the United States. The family included Mike Brown, his wife, and their school-age son. They had also had contact with the other victims, Cher and Beau, and were all from the same community. Mike owned the house where Wilde lived and ran the bar. When the Brown family disappeared, the new owner, Wilde, announced that he had bought the property from them. As with other victims, law enforcement treated the case as if the family had willingly left. The police stopped searching as soon as they heard claims that people had simply left or traveled elsewhere. It is worth noting that after Mike Brown disappeared, money was still being withdrawn from his account daily, through ATMs. This activity led the police to believe he was still alive, so they did not consider the possibility of his abduction. Over time, the investigation was dropped altogether. It was only when the case was reopened that investigators discovered the withdrawals were linked to a man named Wilde and Laura, who were wanted. The police then began searching for the two. A few days later, a police boat intercepted a ship heading for Nicaragua. Among the passengers were Wilde and Laura. They resisted arrest, forcing an officer to the use of a weapon to subdue them. Before their capture, they had been living in a rented house in Costa Rica. One evening, when they saw a wanted ad on TV, they packed their belongings and attempted to escape. However, someone noticed them and reported their location, leading to their detention. After being arrested, they were charged with the murder of 5 people. However, Wilde refused to give up. He initially maintained his innocence, but when the evidence against him became too overwhelming, he changed his story. He suddenly claimed that Keith owed him $45. This claim was clearly untrue, as Keith barely knew him. Furthermore, there was no logical reason for him to kill Cher and the other neighbors on the island. Keith eventually decided to cooperate with the investigation, which played a key role in uncovering the truth behind the case. However, he feared that his testimony might be considered complicity. He faced the possibility of ending up in prison alongside Wilde, but Wilde later admitted that he had framed Keith and that Keith had nothing to do with the murders. Wilde eventually confessed that he had not only killed Beau and Cher, but also the Brown family. He detailed how he had murdered them in several different locations. Thus, in the 4 years he had lived on the island, he had killed a total of 5 people. According to Wilde's testimony, he invited Cher to dinner to discuss buying her property. She agreed to the meeting, but later that evening, he lured her to the backyard and attacked the back of her head from close range. He then placed her body on an ATV, drove it to a dump on his property, and hid it in a pre-dug hole. He covered the body with dirt and ordered the workers to bury it carefully, while they were completely unaware that they were assisting in a crime. He used a similar method to conceal the evidence of his other murders. His motive was simple greed. He wanted to take their property for himself and was willing to kill to achieve his goal. One day, Wilde got into a fight with another American immigrant and killed the American. He casually buried the body afterwards. He expressed regret and sorrow over his actions during a conversation. However, Laura has steadfastly denied any involvement in the crime. She claimed she knew nothing about what he had done and insisted she had no role in it. This claim was hard to believe. As a result, she was charged with complicity. 11 days after her body was found, Cher's friends and family held a funeral for her. She was buried on the island of Bocas del Toro, which she considered her paradise and her final resting place. The farewell ceremony took place on the highest point of the island, where her ashes were placed in a small hole, and a memorial tribute was set on a tree to honor her. Prosecutors asked for life sentences for both William and Laura. However, the legal process in Panama moved very slowly. Even so, the prosecutor insisted that they would not be lenient with the killers. William Dathan Holbert, also known as Wild Bill, confessed his guilt in court. He was sentenced to 47 years in a local prison, and Laura Michelle Reese was sentenced to 26 years for being an accessory, although she did not admit to helping her husband. In court, neither showed any remorse. After being imprisoned, they divorced. Despite their imprisonment, they were not too upset. In 2015, Laura remarried Sadovnikov. While serving his sentence, Wilde established a church that gained official recognition from the Panama Prison Service. He proudly called himself the advisor of this religious organization and began representing Panama in defending the rights of those serving prison sentences. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Marta Russo. The Marta Russo case not only shocked Italy in the late 1990s, but also became a symbol of unsolved mysteries in the history of criminal justice. The sudden death of a promising young woman on the campus of Sapienza University, which is considered a symbol of intellectualism and enlightenment, left the whole society in a state of shock. Behind that tragic event, the doubts, controversies, and the inscrutable motives of those accused created a story that was heartbreaking and mysterious. Today's story will show how carelessness can lead to dire consequences when an investigation begins. Typically, the circumstances tend to complicate the investigation. Unfortunately, some detectives manipulate these circumstances to fit their narrative. This can result in a controversial case like the one we will discuss today, which still many unanswered questions. Marta Russo, born in 1975, described as intelligent, energetic, and promising. At the time of the events, Marta had just turned 22 in March. She was a young and beautiful law student at the prestigious University of La Sapienza in Rome. Fulfilling her long-held dream of attending this historic institution, Marta had ambitious plans for her future and aspired to become a lawyer. Before achieving that goal, she needed to complete her degree. She was known for being compassionate and sociable, always eager to help others. She even expressed her wish to donate her organs in the event of her death. On the morning of May 9, 1997, she was having a typical day, walking on the university campus with her friend Rosanna Capone, moving between the buildings of the University of Statistics, Politics, and Law. They were carrying textbooks and notebooks while discussing their upcoming exams. There were no signs of anything unusual happening. Suddenly, at 11:42, Rosanna heard a strange clicking sound, and Marta collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Rosanna thought it might have been a weapon, but she wasn't certain. Several witnesses who saw Marta fall rushed over to help. However, other passers-by disagreed with Rosanna's belief that Marta had been attacked by force. They listened to Rosanna but thought she was mistaken, as the possibility of a violent attack at such a time and place seemed too improbable. All doubts were quickly resolved when a pool of blood began to form beneath the head of Marta. Who would attack a defenseless student in the middle of the day on a university campus filled with people? It seemed unbelievable. Marta had been wounded, and a small bullet hole was discovered in her left ear, indicating that the bullet had entered her brain. Bystanders called for an ambulance right away, which arrived to assess her condition. Marta was alive but in critical condition and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Once at the clinic, she fell into a coma. Her brain function ceased, but life support was maintained in hopes that she might recover. Her parents prayed for her safety and hoped she would regain consciousness. Meanwhile, doctors recognized that her chances of recovery were nearly non-existent. Even if Marta did wake up, there was almost a certainty that she would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. At the time, forensic experts were working at the crime scene. It was an open area connecting two university buildings. Along the edges of the passage, there was a building facade with windows and a blank wall opposite, with a few sparse trees. Detectives needed to determine the attacker's location at the time of the incident. Marta's friend couldn't pinpoint where the sound came from. It was very quiet, and Rosanna was the only witness to hear the sound of the attack. Another challenge arose when Marta's body was moved several times during attempts to help her. This made it difficult for detectives to establish her exact position when she was attacked, to find the location of the criminal. In order to understand who could even have the idea to shoot an ordinary student, the police began investigating Marta's background. Investigators believe that she may have been in contact with a villain or even involved in a crime, but the investigation showed that the victim was an ordinary, kind girl, and studying her biography did not turn up any potential suspects. Her friends were also typical students, and she had not been in a relationship recently, she spending all her free time studying. Even her diary entries were examined, but they contained nothing suspicious. The investigators began to suspect that the killer's true target was Rosanna. Marta just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, so was killed by accident. The police had gathered some remarkable information. In the days leading up to the murder, Rosanna received 45 anonymous phone calls, which were quite unusual. When she answered one call, there was only silence on the other end, and she gained no information. Additionally, an unknown man called Rosanna's father late at night caused a heated debate where he insulted her but never revealed his identity. With this information, the police started to believe that the attacker intended to kill Rosanna, but mistakenly killed Marta instead. They considered the possibility that the attack was a failed act of revenge against Rosanna's father. He is an influential official who oversaw several prisons. The investigators was thought that the murder of his daughter could be the work of a former inmate. However, detectives investigated these theories and ultimately found them unconvincing. While Rosanna's father may have had enemies, there was no evidence to suggest a motive for harming his family members. Another hypothesis is put forward. The university, in addition to its fame, always had a bad reputation. There have been multiple uprisings and spontaneous attacks on campus. Such cases do happen with alarming frequency. This university was even the site of a terrorist attack on February 12, 1980. Unknown assailants riot in the lobby by weapon in one of the academic buildings while a professor was present. He was attacked 7 times and died as a result. This attack was not an isolated incident. It occurred during a time of heightened political tension, with similar outbreaks linked to the so-called Red Brigades. On March 27, 1985, a university economics professor became a victim of unknown criminals in a new attack. The Red Brigades claimed responsibility for these crimes, stating that such actions were part of their political struggle. However, the murder of Marta, and even Rosanna in 1997, appeared to be senseless acts of violence in this context. Another supporting detail for this theory is the coincidence that May 9th marked the anniversary of the discovery of the body of Aldo Moro, a prominent political figure. It is believed that on this occasion, the Red Brigades decided to launch a new artillery attack. In previous incidents, the Red Brigades had openly admitted their guilt for the crimes they committed. Yet this time, no one took responsibility for the attack on Marta Russo. This was illogical, as it would have made more political sense to target a university professor rather than an ordinary student. As the police investigated, doctors were tried to save Marta. A surgeon removed a .22 caliber bullet from her head, which was then sent to the lab for analysis. At this point, ballistics experts believed that the faint noise heard was likely due to either the use of a silencer or the types of weapons that produce a quieter sound, especially at a distance, making it hard to identify. The .22 caliber was a common choice, as it has low stopping power and generates significantly less noise than more weapon firearms. Forensic experts worked on reconstructing the bullet's trajectory to help identify potential shooting locations. However, because the body had been moved, their efforts were ultimately insufficient and likely inaccurate. The investigation indicated that the attacker likely operated from a building across the street from where the victim was walking. It was presumed that the guy has attacked from a window. Calculations suggested that the guy was in a bathroom adjacent to the classrooms where statistics students were studying. Given the low number of students present at that time, This location allowed the attacker to remain unnoticed and escape without drawing attention. The day after the attack, this theory was supported by a statement from a statistics student who reported visiting the bathroom shortly after the incident. He noticed that the window was wide open, even though it was usually kept closed. Detectives focused their efforts on the area, including the street beneath the window. They quickly located the shell casing from the weapon, which had been overlooked on the first day because it was hidden under a car. To the surprise of ballistic experts, the casing did not match the bullet that killed Marta. Investigators found numerous bullet holes on the wall next to the crime scene. It appears that the students used the restroom as a weapons practice range. Someone had been practicing frequently. A cartridge case discovered at the scene might have come from these practice sessions. While investigating the bathroom, police also uncovered a small nearby room used as a storage area by a cleaning company that worked at the university. Given the trajectory of the bullet, detectives considered this room as a possible location from which the criminal attacked. Access to this room was initially restricted. Investigators conducted thorough checks on all cleaning company employees associated with the university. They discovered that many of these employees were weapon enthusiasts with licenses. Some of them could obtain weapons even without a license. Furthermore, the inventory storage room contained a significant amount of ammunition. Investigators found various types of weapons and equipment, including silencers. They also discovered several different types of bullets, including .22 caliber cartridges. It is curious that the employees of the cleaning company were free from cleaning from 9 to 14 o'clock, and there should not have been anyone there. The attack on Marta occurred at 11:42 a.m., which fell within this time frame. Investigators needed to interview all the cleaners, but they offer alibis in an effort to clear themselves of suspicion. Eventually, all the employees' information was verified. During the investigation, no illegal firearm storage was discovered, as the owners had proper licenses were registered. The cleaning staff admitted that they occasionally used the wall of a nearby building as a weapons practice range, but they insist on always practicing from a trailer and being cautious when no one is around. This situation raised more questions. On May 14, the equipment keeping Marta alive was turned off, and she was pronounced dead. She had been in a coma for 5 days without recovering. Her parents and sister honored her last wish by donating her organs. Around 10,000 people attended Marta's funeral, including relatives, friends, students, and local residents who wanted to pay their respects to her. The mother of Marta revealed that she felt a strong sense of anxiety on the morning of the tragedy, which she found impossible to shake off. Initially, she didn't think much of her unease until the police contacted her about Marta's problem. There was growing public dissatisfaction with the police due to a series of high-profile cases that had not been solved. These failures severely harmed the reputation of the police in Rome. Therefore, they was urgently necessary to restore the lost reputation. This provoked decisive actions from the police, which had a devastating effect. The investigation began when detectives approached the librarian, a 36-year-old man who owns a suppressor and a .22 caliber weapon. Initially, he was considered a suspect, but he had a solid alibi. He was in the audience during the attack, and many witnesses confirmed his presence. As a result, he was cleared of suspicion. The detectives enlisted top forensic experts to search for microscopic gunpowder particles in the building. They meticulously examined windowsills, floors, and various surfaces to identify the location from which of the attacker. Unfortunately, significant time had elapsed since the incident, and the room had been cleaned multiple times. Additionally, rain the following day may have washed away any evidence on the building's exterior. Investigators scoured several floors, and after about 3 hours, they discovered 2 tiny particles of barium and antimony, which are linked to weapon. However, not on the windowsills in the restroom, but on the floor above, in office number 6, rather than on the restroom windowsills. In office number 6, a stain on the windowsill was suspected to be gunpowder, but it was uncertain because many employees in the building owned weapons. Therefore, it was challenging to determine who might have left the trace. Despite the doubt, the stain was deemed reliable evidence. The substance's chemical composition was analyzed, revealing similarities to printer ink or burnt rubber. Investigators concentrated on office number 6, which was a likely location for the attack. Based on the possible trajectory calculations, the attack could have originated from almost anywhere on the campus facade, including the roof. Nevertheless, the police identified the individuals who were in that room during the time of the attack. The office was designated for department assistants, and both students and faculty could access it. All individuals present were questioned. During the investigation, detectives noticed a peculiar pattern. Each person claimed they were not in room number 6 at the time of the murder. The investigators suspected this was a sign of collusion among them. While searching office number 6, they discovered a mobile phone that had made a call at 11:44 on the day of the case, just minutes after the attack. The investigators traced the call to a professor's daughter named Maria Chiara Lipari. She admitted to being in the room during the call, but claimed she did not see anyone with a weapon. She firmly denied any involvement in the murder, stating she did not know Marta, had no motive, and did not possess a weapon of the specified caliber. At this point, the police officers were determined to investigate the situation involving office number 6 thoroughly. They decided to interview Maria at the police station. During these interviews, Maria appeared confused and changed her story multiple times. She was questioned 13 times, and she provided new details in almost every session. Afterward, she expressed that the investigators were pressuring her. Eventually, she recalled that when she returned to office number 6 to make a phone call, a man had come out to meet her. He mumbled something unclear, like hello, but Maria did not recognize him and only watched as he walked away. However, her account changed once again. Maria had a confirmed alibi, which ultimately protected her from being accused. She attributed her behavior to fear and severe stress, and ultimately, she was crossed off the list of suspects. Unfortunately, Maria's troubles were just beginning. One of the suspects was a man named Salvatore Ferraro, who out to be an assistant in philosophy and law. Maria identified him, and he quickly began cooperating with the police. She felt compelled to do this under the threat of being charged. According to her, he resembled the young man who had exited office number 6 when she entered, but she remained uncertain until the very end. The story underwent frequent changes, likely due to the ongoing pressure on Maria. The first interrogation lasted 14 hours, after which investigators repeatedly approached her, increasing the pressure. It is unclear if Maria can be considered a reliable source, but the detectives were determined to find the killer at any cost. To verify her statements, they conducted numerous interrogations with other individuals connected to office number 6. These witnesses provided inconsistent testimonies that did not align with one another. In light of this, the investigators worked hard to piece the information together. At one point, Bruno Romano, the university director, intervened. She expressed her dissatisfaction with the police's handling of the case and pointed out several violations she had observed. Her main concern was that the investigation was not allowing lawyers to be present during witness interviews. Because of her complaints, the director herself became a suspect, now under investigation for allegedly covering up for the killer to protect the university from problems. Under public pressure, the police sought to find a suspect, but all the individuals they considered had solid alibis. The focus then shifted to Gabriella Aledo, the secretary of the university head. Maria reported that Gabriella had been in office number 6 before the attack. The police began to put serious pressure on Gabriella, even threatening her. In parallel, They established wiretapping of the phone in the office where she worked, and there were even plans to install a hidden camera. During her conversations with investigators, Gabriella faced explicit threats. They warned her that if she didn't identify the murderer, she would be accused of the crime herself. On the 45th anniversary of the incident, Gabriella, wanting to protect her career and personal life, stated that she was far from office number 6 and had no knowledge of who might be responsible for the murder. She emphasized that an illness she had endured for years prevented her use of weapons. The detectives were so eager to resolve the case that they even brought in doctors to verify her medical condition. They interrogated Gabriella relentlessly, including her son-in-law, who worked in law enforcement, to pressure her into confessing. Despite being a relative, he played a role in forcing her to confess. The other detectives departed, leaving Gabriella alone with her son-in-law. Despite the circumstances, he was unable to extract a confession from her. The only thing she admitted was that she had been in office number 6. The absence of lawyers added to the complications of the situation, driving Gabriella into despair. Besides, on June 11, authorities decided to arrest director Bruno Romano, charging him with aiding and abetting the murderer, as it was suspected he was covering up for the crime. Later, when criminal cases were brought against all participants in the investigation for abuse of office, the prosecutor insisted that this was a trick to scare those involved. Gabriella, feeling the weight of the intimidation, especially following the arrest of the director, lost her composure out of fear. Eventually, she revealed that on the day of the murder, she saw 2 men in office number 6. One of them drew a weapon when Marta Russo and her friend were positioned between the window and the opposite wall. He attacked, causing Marta to fall. Gabriella also recalled that the young men appeared panicked and clearly did not expect to kill anyone, as they ran away in fear. Witnesses identified the gunman as Salvatore Ferraro. The second man was recognized as Giovanni Scattoni, a 29-year-old philosophy assistant. After receiving the confessions, the detectives were able to piece together all the information. Initially, the young men did not appear to be the type to commit a cold-blooded murder. Even unintentionally, the investigators were not troubled by the fact that Salvatore and Giovanni were not acquainted with Marta and had no motive. They repeatedly denied their guilt, but the Gabriella's confession making it difficult to deny. A major issue for Salvatore arose from the searches conducted in his apartment, where forensic books about the ideal crime were discovered. Investigators quickly assumed that this suggested he had plans for a perfect murder. Although Salvatore argued that he needed this material for his university research, the investigators pointed out that forensic science is not typically a focus for philosophers. However, there was a significant problem. The detectives have been unable to find the weapon that killed Marta. During the trial, both Salvatore and Giovanni maintained their calm demeanor and continued to assert their innocence. There was no direct evidence linking them to the crime, yet the prosecution labeled them as ruthless murderers. Although the prosecution presented evidence from Gabriella, but the jury was out on this. They focused on the traces of gunpowder found on the windowsill of office number 6 and the bullet's trajectory, overlooking the fact that this information was largely inaccurate and speculative. Witnesses who had endured long periods of torture testified. The trial photos clearly showed that Gabriella and Maria struggled to conceal their fear. This situation echoed the experience of a security guard who had seen the defendants in office number 6. He had been a suspect in the case, but chose to cooperate with the police and was later cleared of any suspicion. During the trial, Gabriella recounted how the defendants fled the university after the attack, but this did not prove their involvement in the case. The defense lawyers for the students pointed out that the particles found on the windowsill were not from weapon, but rather from car exhaust. This suggested that the attack could have originated from a different window, potentially implicating other individuals. The lawyer argued that the witness testimonies were exaggerated. Experts, based on their reconstruction of the events, believed that Marta's death resulted from a tragic accident during a reckless game. The attack occurred accidentally due to a series of ricochets hitting her head, which would classify it as manslaughter. By the end of the trial in 2001, both defendants were found guilty. Giovanni received a reduced sentence of 5 years for manslaughter and unlawful possession of firearms, initially sentenced to 7 years. Salvatore involved in the torture of women, but had all charges dropped by university officials. After their convictions, they appealed their sentences, prompting a review. The Supreme Court upheld Giovanni's manslaughter sentence, but dismissed the illegal possession charge. Consequently, Giovanni's prison time was shortened to 5 years, and he was ordered to pay €300,000 in legal fees. This case raises many questions, as there is still uncertainty about the guilt of Giovanni and Salvatore, making it a highly controversial situation. However, some supporters feel that justice has been served. The victims of the police officers' actions spoke out, expressing their dissatisfaction, leading to significant public outcry in internal investigations. Their accounts were corroborated by strong evidence, which included several interrogation recordings that contained threats. These victims have expressed their concerns to investigators. Gabriella reported feeling intimidated and unsafe, and she highlighted the lack of legal representation during interrogations. This action was risky, as it was believed that the police might have support. So, their appeal led to a new investigation. Unfortunately, it quickly ended with no police officers facing any consequences. Gabriella and Maria have long been free and are continuing their lives. Gabriella, now over 50, is a philosophy teacher in Rome who has had to decline several opportunities and faces criticism. Salvatore Ferraro works as a lawyer. He writes books, appears in shows, and helps those who have suffered from injustice and cruelty. The most troubling aspect is that if there was indeed a miscarriage of justice, Marta's killer is still at large. To help alleviate some of the pain caused by this situation, an exception was made for Marta's family. Marta's mother was permitted to embrace the woman who has survived for 20 years thanks to Marta's heart. She is grateful for this gift, recognizing that through this generous act, a part of Marta lives on in others. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case full of unexpected twists. The case of Abigail Hernandez. Abigail Hernandez, commonly known as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, USA. She was the second child of her parents, Rubens Hernandez and Xenia. The family had a happy life for many years, but eventually her parents decided to divorce. After the divorce, Abigail and her older sister Sarah moved in with their mother, who worked as a nurse. From a young age, Abigail showed many positive traits. Those who knew her described her as kind, curious, cheerful, and adventurous. She first explored the world of robotics and shortly after began learning German. However, Abigail's true passion was hiking. This was not surprising, as she lived in an ideal location for such activities, North Conway and its surrounding areas, which are known as one of the main spots for hiking and rock climbing in the northeastern United States. The beautiful local landscape continues to draw many tourists who enjoy long walks and outdoor activities. Abigail's high school classmates remember her as a special person who could connect with almost anyone. This ability allowed her to form friendships easily. In 2013, after a busy summer, Abigail returned to school and balanced her daily routine with extracurricular activities, which brought her joy. At that time, she was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Jimmy Campbell, and spent most of her free time with him. Overall, Abigail led a typical life in a beautiful and safe area with a low crime rate, which made her and her loved ones feel secure when they went out or returned home. However, everything changed dramatically when a man named Nathaniel entered her life. Nathaniel Kibbe, known as Nate, lived about 50 kilometers from Conway in Gorham, New Hampshire. He was born on July 15, 1980, and little is known about his family or early life. According to some sources, he attended the same school as Abigail, but many years earlier, meaning they never crossed paths within the school walls or outside of it. During his school years, most of Nathaniel's classmates viewed him as very aggressive and cruel. Reports from peers indicated that he kept a list of names of future victims, primarily fellow students. Additionally, Nathaniel often claimed to be part of a gang called the Vipers, and he was generally regarded as someone not to be trifled with. As Nathaniel grew older, he seemed to change on the surface. He got a job at a company that specialized in mechanical processing and manufacturing. People who knew him during this time saw him as disciplined, and his colleagues and supervisors regarded him as an exemplary employee. However, they were unaware of his dark past. Previously, Nathaniel had attempted to abduct a 16-year-old girl who was trying to get on a school bus. He also had multiple encounters with law enforcement due to banned substance possession. Furthermore, he was involved in various firearm-related incidents and was often caught lying while trying to buy them from specialty shops. This is just a glimpse of his troubling history. Some reports indicate that Nathaniel lived with a 13-year-old girl for several months, claiming she was his girlfriend and openly acknowledging the inappropriate nature of their relationship. In reality, such a relationship between an adult and a minor is a serious crime. Nathaniel's neighbors in the trailer park kept their distance from him. While they didn't see him as an immediate threat, they didn't trust him because of his questionable behavior. On October 9, 2013, Abigail left school and, as usual, went for a walk. Unfortunately, one of her birthday gifts, hiking boots she wanted to wear for her 15th birthday, caused her discomfort. They rubbed against her feet, leading to painful blisters that made walking difficult. Nevertheless, she felt she had no choice but to continue on her way, trying to distract herself from the pain while enjoying the scenery and thoughts about the upcoming holiday. Later, her boyfriend Jimmy texted her again to express his love. Abigail replied with a heart emoji. Abigail's school is not far from home, but her usual walk became long and painful because her feet were chafed. She had to focus on each step, trying to place her feet gently on the ground. So, she felt genuinely frightened when she heard a car approaching. The driver was Nathaniel, who was unusually friendly and welcoming. He offered Abigail a ride, but she politely declined since she didn't know him. However, Nathaniel insisted, noticing that she was clearly uncomfortable. When she explained that her new shoes had caused blisters, he suggested that if she kept walking, her feet would hurt even more, which made Abigail hesitate. He then opened the passenger door of his car, and Abigail reluctantly sat in that position. As Nathaniel started the car, he began asking her various questions. At first, everything seemed fine to Abigail. However, he soon mentioned that he needed to stop at a hardware store to buy a few items for his house. He then drove into the parking lot of a large hardware store and parked in a secluded area away from the entrance. By this point, Abigail was feeling quite nervous, but tried to stay calm and act naturally. She even tried to convince Nathaniel that her house was close enough for her to walk, but when he heard this, Nathaniel insisted even more that he would take her home as they had initially agreed. At that moment, tension filled the air as Abigail decided to unbuckle her seatbelt and try to escape the car. However, Nathaniel quickly reacted to her movement in an unexpected way. He grabbed her shirt with one hand and pulled a weapon from the glove compartment with the other, aiming it directly at her. In a matter of seconds, the situation escalated dramatically, and Abigail realized she was in real danger. Nathaniel not only kept the weapon pointed at her, but also threatened to hurt her. Feeling trapped, Abigail understood that she needed to stay calm and comply with him. After a few minutes, Nathaniel placed a large baseball cap on Abigail's head and bound her hands with tourniquets. He then started the car and drove off. At some point, Nathaniel noticed that Abigail was constantly looking towards the road, positioning her head in such a way that the baseball cap was not limiting. This angered him, and he used a stun weapon on her, causing her to lose consciousness. When Abigail regained her senses, she found herself in a dark, small room without windows. The only thing she could see was a poster on the wall featuring a snake with the words, "Don't step on me." A few minutes later, Nathaniel blindfolded her with tape, tied her hands with plastic straps, and placed a motorcycle helmet on her head. Once he ensured she was completely immobilized and helpless, he removed her clothes and coerced her into intimacy for the first time. From that day on, Nathaniel held the girl captive, indulging in his worst instincts and subjecting her to various forms of abuse. He also threatened to harm her family and friends if she attempted to escape or tell anyone about her situation. Typically, Abigail returned home after dinner, but when 7:00 p.m. arrived and she was still absent, her mother became very concerned. She asked her eldest daughter, Sarah, if Abigail had mentioned any plans to go out. Unfortunately, Sarah had no information to provide. Xenia then tried to call her daughter, but it seemed Abigail's phone was turned off. Given these circumstances, Xenia felt compelled to contact the police to report her daughter missing. Immediately, law enforcement officials used the existing missing child search protocol. Meanwhile, Xenia and Sarah contacted several of Abigail's friends in the hope that one of them might know where she was. However, none of these measures produced the desired results. There was no one who could give them any information that would help them find her, and Nathaniel was the only person who knew where she was. In addition, Nathaniel understood perfectly well that any mobile phone could be tracked, so he almost immediately smashed Abigail's phone. Thus, the local authorities and her relatives were desperately searching for her, while she was in Nathaniel's power. When Nathaniel spent time with the victim, he tried to turn on the music at full volume so that no one would hear her screams. In fact, the acts of physical aggression from Nathaniel were quite common. Nathaniel used all sorts of tactics to intimidate Abigail in order to keep her under his control. For example, the aggressor constantly told her that if she behaved well, he would not cause her much harm. Along with this, he affirmed that without any hesitation, he would take her life and also her family if the situation required it. So Abigail could only pray. She repeated to herself over and over again that she needed to calm down and try to analyze her situation. She focused on one goal: she needed to do everything possible to save her life. She believed the best strategy might be to get closer to her kidnapper. Enduring bullying from him, Abigail tried to lower his guard. Whenever she could, she spoke to him calmly, insisting that she didn't judge his actions. She also mentioned that everyone makes mistakes and promised to keep quiet about the incident if he set her free. However, all her attempts to get closer to Nathaniel were completely unsuccessful. It seemed that the man was even becoming more cruel than before. The room where Nathaniel kept Abigail was nearly soundproof, resembling a modernized cargo container. There were no windows, making it impossible for her to connect with the outside world. To further isolate her, Nathaniel put up a sign on the front door that read, "Strangers, entry is prohibited." While this seemed odd to his neighbors, they didn't pay much attention, as Nathaniel had always been considered peculiar, and it was his property. During her time with Abigail, he indulged in his disturbing desires, subjecting she to various forms of physical and psychological manipulation. Despite her dire situation, Abigail held on to hope that she would eventually escape this nightmare. She remained determined and focused on a strategy to soften her captor. Gradually, she made some progress. At one point, Nathaniel even allowed her to stay in his trailer, marking a shift in their relationship. Meanwhile, in Conway, posters about Abigail's disappearance were plastered everywhere. Although, despite the local authorities' efforts, they found no specific leads to help locate her. The search for Abigail proved to be extremely challenging. Her disappearance sparked significant public concern, and many people have been closely following the developments of this case. Abigail's relatives were at a loss about what to do next. Although they remained determined to find her, their hope was slowly diminishing. Nathaniel and Abigail also were closely following the news about the case, as it was frequently covered on television, which kept her hope for rescue alive. However, Nathaniel began to feel increasingly uneasy as time passed. Posters with Abigail's image only multiplied in the media, which regularly showed her data, including both a description of her appearance and contact numbers to call in case of any information related to the case. The search for Abigail had become one of the largest in New Hampshire's history. Meanwhile, she continued to endure her worst nightmare. While her search became more intense, the authorities still could not find anything worthwhile to direct their efforts in the right direction. They had already questioned Jimmy, thinking he might have information about her disappearance. However, Jimmy cooperated with the police and confirmed his alibi. A month had passed since Abigail went missing. Her mother was beginning to lose hope. She hadn't checked her mailbox in weeks, but when Xenia sorted through the accumulated letters, she found one from her daughter. Dated October 22, 2013, the letter read approximately, "Dear Mom, I miss you and love you more than you can imagine. I'm sorry about everything that's happened. I've seen the news reports. To answer your questions, I want you to know that I am alive, well, and safe. Even though I miss you dearly, I can't share my location right now. Please stay strong for me, as I am staying strong for you. I've realized that patience, hope, and courage can make a difference. Don't lose hope. Keep moving forward, and remember me. I believe everything will work out for us. I love you. Please give Sarah a hug for me, and tell her I love and miss her very much." Dreams come true. The authorities analyzed this letter, trying to find at least some clue that could lead them to Abigail. Unfortunately, they found nothing useful. They only managed to confirm that this letter was indeed written by Abigail. At least they were completely sure that it was her handwriting. But none of them suspected that this letter was Nathaniel's idea. He thought that it could stop the search or slow down the investigation. In fact, this was not the first letter Abigail had written. She had previously crafted another letter and managed to create a secret message by pressing her nails into the paper. This hidden message contained words asking for help, but they were not easily visible. Nathaniel somehow discovered Abigail's attempt to communicate and punished her severely for it. Then he forced her to write the very letter that Xenia eventually received. For a long time, the letter's contents were kept secret, but many news outlets began to spread rumors that Abigail had willingly run away from home because she might be pregnant. Consequently, almost everyone in the city, including Abigail's classmates, discussed the escape. Abigail's best friend later expressed her outrage at this theory. She believed with certainty that her friend was not expecting a child, and felt that Abigail was not the type to shy away from tough situations. Both Abigail's family and the investigators were convinced that she was in serious danger. 6 weeks after her daughter's disappearance, Xenia spoke to journalists, hoping to inspire her daughter with positivity. She firmly believed that Abigail was alive and thought she might see her on television. "I know that hope is stronger than fear. I hope one day you can reach out to me. I feel your presence in my life every day, and I wish for your safe return home as soon as possible." Unfortunately, days turned into weeks and weeks into a month, with law enforcement still no closer to solving the case. However, they did gather enough evidence to conclude that Abigail was being held against her will. Meanwhile, the relationship between Abigail and Nathaniel was growing stronger. Although it took some time, Abigail managed to earn Nathaniel's trust. He even involved her in one of his illegal activities, working on counterfeit banknotes. Despite this, Abigail was still subjected to physical abuse and insults. Months passed, and the investigation yielded no significant leads. Xenia and Sarah continued to feel sadness and despair. At Nathaniel's house, life continued normally. Despite spending a long time captive, Abigail never discovered the true identity of her captor. She called him by a simple word: the owner. Nathaniel often surprised her with his unpredictable behavior and emotional shifts. Recently, their interactions had included more calm moments, leading Abigail to believe that he might not be as cruel as he once appeared. However, this perception changed dramatically when Nathaniel placed a makeshift collar around Abigail's neck and activated it, sending a strong electric shock through her weakened body. When she regained consciousness, Nathaniel warned her that he would take action if she attempted to escape. By mid-January 2014, Abigail had been held captive for over 6 months. Perhaps her relationship with Nathaniel remained the same as before. Undoubtedly, there was a certain connection between them. However, she was still at a disadvantage, and Nathaniel tried to keep his cool. At this time, some progress was made. For instance, Nathaniel allowed Abigail to read and even gave her several books, which may have been his first mistake. One of the cookbooks at Nathaniel's house had his name on it, and Abigail noticed this. When she addressed him by name, Nathaniel was genuinely surprised and asked how she knew it. Abigail truthfully replied that she saw his name on the book's cover. Being honest was part of her strategy to build a connection with her kidnapper. She hoped that one day Nathaniel would decide to let her go, or someone would simply find her. Abigail has been locked in a soundproof box for very long, and now she is closer to freedom than ever. So interesting. Her potential rescue was not due to her actions, but rather because Nathaniel had been involved in a minor traffic accident. Realizing that it was only a matter of time before the authorities showed up at his door, he decided to call the nearest police station and offered to cooperate. As a result, law enforcement arrived at his home and discovered a large stash of firearms of various calibers. In this situation, Nathaniel willingly surrendered the weapons to the authorities. He allowed the police to search his trailer multiple times. Again and again, police officers went in and out, passing only a few meters from the container in which Abigail was located, but because of his cooperative behavior, she remained captive. Despite Abigail being missing for a long time, her family and the authorities continued to search for her, hoping she was still alive. Nathaniel seemed unfazed by the situation. He would leave his house during the day and return in the evening, without worrying that Abigail might attempt to escape. However, some of Nathaniel's actions changed the situation. He met a woman, and they eventually became intimate. During their conversation, she revealed that she was struggling financially and couldn't afford her rent. Nathaniel decided to help her by giving her some money. Later, while shopping at a supermarket, and it should be said that she was genuinely surprised when the cashier told her that her $50 were counterfeit. She had to abandon her items at the checkout and leave the store quickly. After returning home, she called Nathaniel and took out her frustration on him. She also advised him to dispose of all the counterfeit money he had at home, since the police were expected to visit him soon. Of course, she had no idea her call would have significant consequences for Abigail. When their conversation ended, Nathaniel went into a panic and decided he needed to eliminate anything that could lead to his arrest. Most of all, more than the potential charges of counterfeiting, he was primarily anxious about possible accusations related to Abigail's kidnapping and regular crimes against her personal safety. So, on July 20, 2014, Fearing he would be caught, Nathaniel returned almost all of Abigail's belongings. He then placed her in the passenger seat of his car and put the same baseball cap on her that she had worn on the day of her kidnapping. After that, Nathaniel started the car, and they drove together for several hours. Eventually, he stopped and ordered Abigail to get out. He threatened her one last time that he would come back for her, cause pain and suffering to her loved ones if she told anyone about what happened to her or reported him to the police. This is how Abigail found freedom. Later, Abigail reflected that she couldn't tell if what she was experiencing was a dream or reality. However, once she regained her senses, she began walking towards a house. Along the road, she for a long time couldn't believe that she was free. After enduring 9 months of confinement and trauma, she was finally able to return home. As walking to her house, she heard the familiar voice of her mother, who was talking to someone on the phone. When Abigail stepped inside and shouted "Mom," Xenia was overwhelmed with disbelief at hearing her daughter's voice again after so many months. She even asked for confirmation, trying to ensure it was really her. Later that evening, Xenia urged Abigail to share everything that had happened to her. Threats from Nathaniel quite quickly surfaced in her memory. She constantly avoided details about the identity of her kidnapper. After discussing the situation, Xenia and Abigail decided to contact the police. However, during the police interview, Abigail once again withheld information about her kidnapper, fearing he might return and harm her family. After the police questioned Abigail, the news of her release from captivity gradually spread throughout the area. When Abigail returned home from the police station, she took a bath and then lay down in her own bed. It still felt like a dream, but the horrifying memories brought her back to reality. In that moment, she felt exhausted, and for the first time in a long while, Abigail was able to truly relax, feeling safe. The next day was equally strange for her. On one hand, she wanted to return to her normal life and engage in her favorite activities. On the other hand, she was still plagued by fear and anxiety at the thought of Nathaniel possibly reappearing in her life. The following days passed in a similar manner, and Abigail sensed that her sense of freedom was not yet complete. Perhaps that is why on July 27, 2014, she could not stand it and confessed to her mother that she had deliberately hidden all the information about the man who had kidnapped her. She suggested that they should speak to the police again, which they did. The officers welcomed Abigail's new statement, which proved crucial for the investigation. After Abigail shared everything she knew about Nathaniel, the authorities began preparing an operation to capture him quickly. The following day, the police arrived at Nathaniel's home, surrounded his trailer, and ordered him to surrender. Surprisingly, Nathaniel did not resist arrest. After his arrest, Nathaniel was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, a thorough search was conducted at his residence, and the police officers did not leave any corner unattended, collecting all the evidence that was of even the slightest relate to the investigation. During the interrogation, Nathaniel requested a lawyer and denied any involvement in the charges against him. The preliminary hearing on this case took place the very next day after the arrest, and in the days that followed, Nathaniel appeared in court multiple times to review the evidence presented by the prosecution. By this point, there was no doubt that he was responsible for the horrific events in Abigail's life. On August 12, 2014, Nathaniel's lawyers filed a motion for his release in court, and unexpectedly, the judge in Kona approved it. However, Nathaniel was prohibited from contacting the victim, Abigail, or her family. He had to stay at least 100 meters away from them. The main trial began in mid-December 2014, with Abigail and her family sitting in the front row at the prosecutor's table, closely observing the defense's arguments. At that time, Nathaniel was being held at the Carroll County Correctional Facility, and faced over 180 charges related to Abigail's case. The next court hearing occurred on May 26, 2016, nearly 2 years after Nathaniel's arrest. By then, he had accepted a plea deal and was prepared to admit his guilt, which aimed to avoid a lengthy trial and provided him with some legal advantages. A particularly emotional moment in the trial came when Abigail delivered her final statement. She shared that she had resumed her studies, social life, and sports activities. Then she turned her gaze to Nathaniel and told him that even though he was a real monster to her, but he would always be a man who simply made the wrong choice. It seemed that Abigail wanted Nathaniel to understand that she forgave him. Continuing her speech, Abigail expressed her deep regret that things had not turned out differently, but she acknowledged that her family's safety was paramount. After all, it wasn't she who sent Nathaniel to prison. Abigail believed that he had put himself in such a position when he decided to keep her captive. All this was his own decision. She concluded her speech by thanking Nathaniel, who had helped her through this ordeal, explaining that the experience had made her appreciate her life and freedom much more. Then she turned to Nathaniel and her mother. Xenia told Nathaniel that despite the fact that part of her soul sincerely hated him, she also wanted to thank him for not harming her daughter's life. After Abigail's words, Nathaniel Kibbe pleaded guilty to 7 felony charges, including kidnapping and abuse. He will serve 45 to 90 years in prison. Meanwhile, Abigail was able to return to a normal life sometime after Nathaniel's trial. A few years later, she moved to a new county, started a family, and had a child. In an interview, she shared that during the 9 months she was held captive, she was determined to survive. She also mentioned that forgiveness played a crucial role in helping her return to a normal life, and she considered it the best form of revenge against her kidnapper. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Brian Cohey. A normal morning in a quiet town is suddenly shattered by the horrific discovery of the dismembered body of an unknown victim hidden in a family room. What led to this inhuman act? Where is the line between mental instability and intentional crime? These questions have turned the case into a long-lasting nightmare in the public mind. Brian Cohey was born on January 10, 2002, in Grand Junction, Colorado, USA. He was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder at a young age. In high school, Brian began to show antisocial behavior, becoming an outsider who often clashed with other students, causing them discomfort. He enjoyed humiliating other children and spent a lot of time online, where he bullied his chat partners. This behavior occurred both on social media and at school. It worsened over the years. In the 11th grade, Brian's parents were called to school again because the principal reported that students and teachers felt unsafe around him. Brian frequently teased, insulted his classmates, leading to fights. However, his parents believed these concerns were exaggerated. In 2018, Brian got into legal trouble for the first time when he was arrested for assault after using a homemade weapon to attack another student, causing serious injuries. As a result, he was suspended from school. In 2019, Brian faced similar issues again when he triggered a panic attack in another student with post-traumatic stress disorder. Brian deliberately targeted this student without regard for the consequences. That same year, he was suspended once more for making inappropriate comments toward female students. Throughout this time, Brian displayed an obsession with cruelty and violence, particularly towards serial killers. Brian openly idolized the notorious serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, and even shared his terrifying passion with his friends. Other students nicknamed him Demir, and Brian was pleased with it. In high school, a teacher discovered a diary in Brian's briefcase that contained detailed statistics about various serial killers. Brian was fascinated by the number of victims, their motives, and the methods they used. He had a penchant for dark humor and often shared gruesome jokes. The teachers called his parents about his behavior. As a result, Brian was transferred to a school for children with special needs. His parents thought his behavior stemmed from an aggressive nature. They had previously taken him to a doctor to explore ways to address his troubling behavior. Medical staff at the center quickly recognized that Brian needed a thorough evaluation to check for potential psychosis. However, he refused to be hospitalized or undergo further testing. He was taking medication for attention deficit disorder and anxiety, but it did little to help him, particularly during this challenging time. Despite his behavior issues, Brian managed to maintain a small group of friends. After high school, they all became outcasts. After graduating from high school, Brian got a job at a local grocery store. Around the same time, his parents divorced. He lived with his mother, while his father visited him nearly every day. Despite the divorce, his parents remained on good terms. The mother operated a kindergarten, and the father started a small business making life jackets. Although the parents had enough money to support their son, it did not help improve Brian's situation. Early in the morning on February 28, 2021, police received a strange call from a boat station near the Colorado River, where the father of Brian worked. Brian had gotten his car stuck in the mud on the riverbank, and the vehicle was subsequently pulled into the water. It fell from a steep bank and sank a few meters deep. By the time the police arrived, Brian was already there with his parents, whom he had called for help. There were some caring people on the pier who helped Brian warm up. The police sought to understand how and why Brian ended up in this situation at night. He claimed he was looking for privacy and a peaceful place to be himself. However, the police found his story hard to believe. They questioned how he could have deliberately driven the car backwards towards the water, and then, when he tried to leave, causing the vehicle to roll into the river. Although Brian managed to escape from the sinking car, he was completely drenched and at risk of hypothermia. As it turned out, he had arrived there late in the evening and stayed until dawn. It was odd that a young man his age was only engaged in such activities. His parents told the police that he had developmental disabilities, which made his behavior different from others. Brian wanted to call for help because it was February and cold. He was soaked and didn't know how to get home. Unfortunately, his mobile phone had died. After getting out of the car, Brian went to the road, hoping to get help from passing drivers, but no cars were in sight. After 5 minutes, a man and his son stopped to offer assistance. They gave him a mobile phone, allowing Brian to call the police and his parents to keep warm. The man invited Brian to sit in their car and provided him with support. Brian was clearly distressed about the situation, fearing his parents would be upset when they found out he had sunk the car. The unusual incident made the police chuckle. They didn't pay much attention to the submerged car. Meanwhile, Brian's parents were on the pier, trying to figure out how to retrieve the vehicle from the water. Brian's father owned a business nearby and was familiar with the area. He realized that he would need specialized equipment to solve the problem because the shore was very steep. Unfortunately, it was too early to call a tow truck, and Brian was cold and at risk of hypothermia. They called several tow truck companies until they finally found a free vehicle. All this was written off as a funny absurdity. The police facilitated the family so that the parents could change clothes and let their son warm up. The officers then went back to the boat dock to help tow the car. However, their laughter quickly turned to concern when the car was on dry land, as they noticed something that looked like blood dripping from it. One officer promptly contacted the boy's father to alert them that Brian might be hurt. He could be unaware of his injury because of hypothermia. The vehicles were returned to the family without any inspection or collection of blood samples by the detectives. They not confirm whether the liquid they found was blood or something else, It simply resembled blood in color. Fortunately, Brian was unharmed, and the incident was dismissed as an accident. However, the following day, on March 1, police began to realize their oversight. A woman named Monique called 911 to report that a man named Warren Barnes was missing. Monique owned a wedding shop near the place where Warren frequently rested. They had formed a friendship because he loved to read and often sat in the same spot nearby. Warren was homeless, but was known for being pleasant and calm. Monique often spoke with him and would give him small jobs to help him earn money for food and water. Warren was well known in the city, especially for his passion for reading. People regarded him as friendly, intelligent, and well-read. Although Warren never shared the details of why he was homeless, those around him understood that he had faced significant challenges in life. On March 1, Monique stated that she last saw Warren on February 27 around 5:00 a.m. He would often come to the store before it opened, chat with her, drink coffee, and receive his tasks for the day. They had planned to meet the next day, but he never arrived. Concerned, Monique reported the situation to the police on February 28 after discovering that Warren's wallet had been found at the boat station, which had her phone number written in it. The police reached out to her to return the wallet, which raised her concerns. Warren had always been responsible and took his job seriously. During their 2 years of working together, he had never been late or missed a day, except for 2 occasions when he had informed her in advance about his absence. She found it odd that the wallet was discovered at the boat station, especially since Warren did not own a car and had no reason to be there. The location was quite far from where he lived, taking about an hour and a half to reach. This made her think that something might have happened to her friend and assistant. She provided detectives with a single photograph of Warren, taken several years before he disappeared. Coincidentally, the wallet was found by Brian's father, whose business was located near the boat station. It was discovered in Brian's car, immediately after the vehicles were towed. When his father asked Brian about the wallet, he said he had found it at the station and intended to return it to its owner, but he had forgotten due to the events of the previous day. However, his parents didn't believe him because they also found latex gloves and a large kitchen knife with suspicious blood-like stains. They were aware of their son's unusual behavior and couldn't understand why he would take someone else's wallet. While Brian was attending a party with his group of friends, the horrifying moment came. Terry, Brian's mother, found a human head hidden in a large plastic bag in Brian's closet. There was another similar bag, but she couldn't bring herself to open it and check what was inside. Instead, she placed both bags in the kitchen sink and immediately called her ex-husband, convinced that their son had killed. His parents contacted Brian and asked him to come home right away. They remained calm and didn't mention what they had found in his room. The father told Brian that he needed to retrieve the keys to the drowned car, and Brian, not suspecting anything, left the party. When he arrived at his home, several police officers had already been called and were on the scene. They quickly found he standing on the street in front of Brian's house. The officers asked him why his parents were worried enough to call the police. Brian calmly explained that they had likely discovered a severed human head and hands in his closet, and he then confessed to the murder. Brian did not resist arrest and was cooperative. He willingly got into the police car and went to the station for questioning without being handcuffed. He appeared cheerful and seemed oddly pleased with the situation. In contrast, Terry was in a state of hysteria. Her ex-husband tried desperately to comfort her, as she struggled to accept that their son was now a murderer. After Brian arrived at the police station, one of the detectives stayed behind to speak with his parents. They recounted the events of the past 24 hours, including the situation with the car and wallet. According to his father, Terry was skeptical of Brian's explanation about the wallet, which prompted her to check his room for anything suspicious. she had a nagging feeling and ultimately made this horrifying discovery. He claimed he discovered a wallet in a car, which contained Warren's ID and Monique's phone number. He quickly reached out to Monique, who was connected to the missing man, hoping to return the wallet. During this conversation, he learned that Warren hadn't shown up for work and that there was a search underway for him, while Brian dismissed any alarming thoughts. His parents spoke with him, but he offered various excuses. Brian remained unusually calm, prompting the police to ask him basic questions to assess his mental and physical state. His demeanor was striking. He appeared unconcerned about his actions. He provided a detailed account of events, sometimes speaking with a sense of pride and making inappropriate jokes. According to him, on the evening of February 27, he was driving and noted that he was in a very troubled state of mind, hearing voices that urged him to find a victim. Around 11 p.m., he stopped under a bridge near the sheriff's office, where he decided to rest. He thought it was a suitable place and proceeded to put on 3 layers of gloves, wear the mask, and took a knife. Brian went outside, removed the tarpaulin, and without warning, began to strike Warren in the head and neck. Warren tried to defend himself and repeatedly asked, "Why are you doing this?" Despite his pleas, Brian continued to hit him. Brian estimated that he inflicted 30 to 40 stab wounds before stopping. Throughout the attack, Brian repeatedly said "dirty," "smelly," expressing his disgust for the victim. By the end of the assault, Warren showed no signs of life. Brian noted that he was sweating but was surprised at how easy it was to kill someone. When he finished, the victim's head was practically separated from the body. Next, he decided to explore the insides, so he opened the abdominal cavity. Brian then cut off the victim's hands and finally victim's head. He made a long cut from ear to ear, leaving a horrifying mark on the victim's mouth. Brian had difficulty recalling all the atrocities and details of the crime scene, much of which was later deleted from his phone. However, experts managed to recover these images, revealing horrifying details of the senseless murder. Brian placed the head into a separate bag. He then loaded everything into the trunk of his car and drove home. Once there, he stored the remains in the closet, cleaned the knife, and washed his clothes. According to his confession, during the act, he made animal sounds and growled. Many people from his life later confirmed they had noticed similar behavior in him before. Brian stated that he felt no remorse or pity, which was clearly a demonstration of his indifference. In fact, he took pride in emulating his idols. Throughout most of the interrogation, Brian smiled. The investigators were horrified by the details of the crime and the enthusiasm with which Brian recounted them. It was as if he wanted to remember every aspect of the murder, aiming for as a maniac. He even drew a rough map of the bridge and the crime scene from above. Eventually, the investigators realized he was reliving the murder in his mind, which seemed to give him immense satisfaction. During the attack, he accidentally tore one of his gloves, but he only noticed it later. Wanting to avoid capture, he returned to the crime scene and took Warren's body. He then headed to the coast and the boat dock, but after throwing the body into the water, his car got stuck in the wet ground and slid into the river. As a result, he had to seek help. After the crime became public, police conducted a thorough examination of Brian's car and discovered many more bloodstains than they had initially found. However, this evidence was no longer so important since the investigators had in their hands the parts of Warren's body, as well as a confession which was recorded and documented throughout. During his interrogation, Brian not only smiled, but also made cruel jokes about his victim. His parents had often heard his dark humor, but never suspected he was capable of such violence. Terry was aware of her son's fascination with serial killers, but she didn't fully take his obsession seriously. Wanting to guide his intense interest in a positive direction, She gave him a book about forensic science and murder investigations. She hoped this would inspire him to become a successful investigator instead of being consumed by his fascination. Unfortunately, her efforts were in vain. Instead of guiding him away from harm, they ultimately helped him prepare for the murder of a homeless man. After the interrogation, the police spoke with Brian's friend, Keelan, who had spent time with him on the day of his arrest. Keelan had known Brian since 9th grade and described him as a very secretive person who enjoyed making provocative jokes and dark humor. Just before the crime, Brian confided in her that he planned to kill a homeless person, thinking no one would care to look for that person. However, Keelan took this as joke. Brian and his friends shared love for humor, and his friends do not take Brian's violent thoughts seriously. Brian's parents also paid little attention to his behavior at school and believed that teachers were unfairly criticizing him. At that time, concerned for their safety, the teachers held a meeting to discuss Brian's behavior. Brian's parents agreed to monitor him more closely after he expressed admiration for the criminals. When the police discovered Brian's diary, which contained statistics on serial killers, they uncovered his criminal plan. It out to be a plan according to which he was supposed to organize a home invasion to kill adults and children, then take valuables and leave the scene of the massacre. Investigators believed he would use a hunting knife and a .45 caliber weapon to carry out his plan. Fortunately, Brian did not have the opportunity to execute his plan. In his diary, he also expressed his belief in natural evil, which he used to justify his future actions. Although law enforcement officers have recovered Warren's body parts, his remains have not yet been fully recovered. The search in the water has continued, but not with enough urgency. The police had strong evidence, including a confession, to charge Brian with murder. During an interview with detectives, Brian admitted that he had been planning the crime for about 6 months. He had thoroughly researched forensic science, knew that the deaths and disappearances of homeless individuals received little attention from investigators. He even considered leaving a body at the crime scene but changed his mind, because influenced by a book his mother had given him. Brian's calculation that homeless people were treated less attentively out to be correct, but chance intervened in the matter, which exposed him. If it hadn't been for a car trouble incident, he might have successfully committed murder. Investigators reviewed his internet activity and found that, in the year before the crime, his online activity increased significantly. He was also dealing with mental health issues, and frequently read about paranoid and schizoid personality disorders. On February 28, the day after the murder, he searched for information on how to delete data from an Android phone and how to dispose of organic waste. Although he had never received any formal diagnoses, he believed he had schizophrenia. He reported experiencing delusions and felt that he was being watched by everyone, even birds. Due to these claims, the police were cautious when interacting with him, concerned that he might attempt to evade responsibility by arguing that he was insane. Brian didn't stop at just one detailed account of a murder. He admitted that on Halloween 2018, he killed a cat. He caught a cat, put it in a bag, and then abused, beat, and trampled it for an extended period before killing it. Afterward, he hid Cat's head in his house. When the remains began to decompose and smell, he simply discarded them. Many people were aware of this incident, yet Brian faced no consequences. During his interrogation, he could not be silenced. He kept sharing the bizarre story after another. He claimed that shortly before the murder, his parents discovered a toolbox in his room containing hammers, shovels, knives, ties, a saw, adhesive tape, and ropes. He openly stated that these items were intended for killing people. His parents urged him to get rid of the tools, warning that they would have to contact the police if he didn't. Even then, they still believed he was incapable of committing a crime. According to his diary entries, he initially planned to find an escort girl to lure, torture, and eventually kill. He thought no one would search for such women or homeless people, but he later changed his mind and considered a different approach. Brian denied finding any satisfaction in his criminal acts. When asked about his motivations, he admitted to admiring killers and being intrigued by their ability to take lives. He believed he was no different from them and wanted to try it himself. During the investigation, authorities discovered Brian's writings in which he expressed his philosophies on life. These writings were just as incriminating as his confessions, revealing the cruelty that dominated his thoughts. In one of his final posts, he expressed regret for the murder, but his concerns seemed more focused on being caught than on the harm he caused an innocent person. In January 2022, the court ordered Brian to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. He showed no remorse for his actions, but was clearly unhappy about being imprisoned for many years. Along with his lawyer, he pursued an insanity defense. However, psychiatrists deemed him competent to stand trial. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including body parts, other evidence, and Brian's own confessions. Throughout the trial, Brian often smiled. Ultimately, he was convicted of first-degree murder and evidence concealment. Brian Cohey received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 13 years. The judge declared this case to be the most horrific and inhumane of his career. The Brian Cohey case is one of the most shocking cases in the community, highlighted by its brutality and alarming signs of psychological instability. Brian, a 19-year-old youth, murdered a homeless man. He was held responsible for his barbaric act with a life sentence in prison, removed a dangerous threat to society. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kenny Fennell. Kenny Fennell was born in 1992 in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Maracaibo, the capital of Zulia State in northwest Venezuela. She was the youngest child in her family and spent her childhood in a rundown home. From a young age, she stood out for her beauty, with bright eyes and white skin. While most children in her neighborhood attended school, she had little interest in studying. Kenny enjoyed spending time with friends and dreamed of a better life. Initially, she dressed modestly and was careful not to draw attention to her body. However, her lifestyle began to change significantly after she met her future best friend, Danila Macarena Leal, known simply as Macarena. Macarena, who was about 5 years older than Kenny, became her role model. At the age of 13, she started going to nightclubs with Macarena, where she first experienced drugs and alcohol, which led her to engage in risky activities. At that time, Macarena was in a romantic relationship with a man known as Kike, who was rumored to be a crime boss. He had previously served time in Sabanita, one of the most notorious prisons in the world. At the Sabanita prisons, inmates have established a unique organizational system. This system allows a few inmates to hold great power, thereby influencing activities such as robbery, extortion, as well as arms and drug trafficking inside the prison. One day, Macarena introduced Kenny to influential criminals who were able to throw parties even while in prison. On December 24, 2010, a group of 10 young people took Kenny from a nightclub directly to prison, where one of the local crime bosses was located. Earlier, Macarena had warned her that a man named Astolfo wanted to see her. Astolfo, 22 years old, a gang member, is serving a sentence in Sabaneta. Despite his young age, he had a long criminal history, including robbery and extortion. However, Kenny did not feel concerned about Astolfo's past, and she fell in love with him at first sight. Astolfo also seems to have feelings for Kenny. He cared for her and gave her lots of gifts. By this time, she had dropped out of the National Polytechnic University and no longer took her life seriously. Her main activities became partying, drinking, and using drugs. Eventually, realizing that she was not the only girl in Astolfo's life, she decided to leave Venezuela in search of a better future. Kenny then meets a woman who suggests she move to Mexico and start selling her body to make her dream come true. Within a few months, she was making a large amount of money and had undergone several surgeries to improve her appearance, allowing her to charge more for her services. During this time, social media began to more clearly reflect her lifestyle. Despite the changes, she saw Astolfo again every time she returned to Venezuela. However, everything changed in March 2014, when she received news that Astolfo had died in a violent incident involving prison officers. Although she was unable to attend his funeral, she honored him by getting his last name tattooed on her shoulder. At that time, Kenny was recognized in Mexico as one of the most expensive escorts in her industry. The website where she offered her services, called Zona Divas, was controlled by the La Union Tepito cartel. In 2017, Kenny met a young man named Brian Mauricio Miranda, who was born on July 7, 1992, and lived in Tepito, a neighborhood in Mexico City. At the time they met, Brian was the third highest-ranking member of the La Union Tepito gang, which was primarily involved in human trafficking and contract killings. The capital's prosecutor's office was already investigating him in 3 separate cases, all related to assaults on his ex-girlfriends and their friends. Despite this, Kenny falls in love with Brian, who is involved in the criminal world. Initially, their relationship seemed normal, but things changed over time. It's unclear when exactly Brian began to mistreat Kenny, but he likely used threats to control her, driven by intense jealousy. Although they met on a platform where Kenny offered call girl services, he asked her to give up that job. In the end, he made her life more and more difficult and unhappy. Brian then quickly moved from threats to physical violence. In July 2017, Kenny shared a photo on social media of herself showing obvious injuries on her face. Around the same time, Brian shaved off most of Kenny's hair, thinking this would make it difficult for her to find new clients. Her friends reported that he also forced her to help distribute illegal drugs. When she realized his true nature, she wanted to end their relationship and escape, but he did not allow it. In October of that year, Brian began a new relationship with a girl from Argentina named Karen, who also worked as an escort. Kenny hoped that with Brian's new relationship, he would let her go. However, the opposite happened. He ordered Karen to keep a close watch on Kenny. Kenny told his friends that Brian was someone who enjoyed hurting people, as if it were his hobby. Notably, the relationship between Brian and Karen lasted only 2 months. Finally, on December 27, 2017, he met her again. He used a fake name to ask her for services. When she arrived, he attacked her violently, causing her face to swell immediately. He also broke her arm and cut her hair with a machete. He not only beat her but also threatened to use violence if she did not return to Venezuela. After each attack, she recorded short videos to document her injuries. In one video, she begged him to give her time to recover and return to Venezuela. Shortly after, Kenny disappeared for a while. She deleted her profile from the portal and stayed away from social media, planning to stay in Mexico. On Friday, February 23, 2018, she decided to leave her secret apartment to meet friends and attend an electronic music festival. However, she never got there as planned. A few days later, local authorities found her lifeless body in Ecatepec de Morelos. It was clear she was the victim of a terrible crime. She had been bullied, beaten, and her face was disfigured by acid. Kenny's friends went to the morgue, but they had difficulty identifying her. After receiving the tragic news, her family asked the authorities to quickly return her body to her homeland. Her body was returned to Venezuela 33 days after it was found. At her funeral, many who knew her were heartbroken. This reaction was understandable, as Kenny was always cheerful, kind, and friendly, easily connecting with everyone around her. That day, Kenny's mother, Mireya Finol, expressed her grief as she felt she had lost her purpose in life. She also called on the Mexican government to seek justice and hold those responsible for her daughter's death accountable. 4 months later, several short videos of Kenny were released, in which she named Brian Mauricio Miranda as someone she feared could threaten her life. In most of these videos, her face is covered in blood. This video provided new information to authorities about her murder. Many still suspect that Brian was involved in her death. Although authorities know where he is, they do not have enough evidence to arrest him, so he remains free. In early February 2019, just a year after the murder, police arrested Brian. At the time, he was with another girl from Venezuela, just like Kenny. He was extremely frightened during the arrest and begged the police not to harm him. The Mexico City Public Security Bureau said the arrest of Brian was a major success in dealing with one of the most dangerous gangs and helped solve several murders involving girls. However, the list of crimes Brian is accused of is long. Authorities believe he has been involved in at least 10 other cases in recent years. Furthermore, a large amount of illegal substances were found in his car during the arrest. After some time, Brian was transferred to the State Attorney General's office. Over the next few days, multiple officers questioned him. Despite clear evidence linking him to the crimes, he was sentenced to only 5 years in prison for drug distribution. On Saturday, November 19, 2022, after nearly 3 years in pretrial detention, Brian was released. He ended up serving just over half of his sentence. This was due to overcrowding in Mexican prisons and the local judicial system's classification of drug distribution as a minor offense. The state attorney's office attempted to appeal this decision, believing that Brian was involved in more serious crimes. However, they could not provide enough evidence to directly link him to those cases. The Mexican judicial system seems to operate under its own rules, which are not always clear to law enforcement officers or the general public. After being released, Brian resumed his criminal activities as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the police force and the Civil Security Office are continuing to investigate. In early October 2023, patrol officers spotted a car with Brian in the back seat. Next to him is Cassandra, a 30-year-old woman from Venezuela who recently moved to Mexico to support herself as an escort. Several officers noticed that Cassandra looked like Kenny. The following day, the Civil Security Secretariat announced that during the arrest, officers seized a backpack containing a significant amount of illegal drugs. It's clear that Brian is at the center of an expanding investigation. During the preliminary hearing, his lawyers tried to get him released, but their arguments were not convincing enough, so he had to appear in court again. On October 20, 2023, the judge officially ordered Brian to be held in custody for his involvement in murder, robbery, and drug trafficking. Unfortunately, a final sentence has not yet been issued. Kenny was not the only victim associated with the website Zona Divas, where many individuals offered their services. This site gained significant attention in 2018 when several girls working there were discovered in Mexico City. Following a major investigation, it was revealed that Zona Divas had been operating for 20 years. Most of the women who created profiles on the site during that time were from Venezuela. Some reports indicate that the site stopped its activities in 2018, but this did not resolve the issue as new similar sites quickly emerged. According to the International Commission on Human Rights, Mexico remains the leading country for this type of illegal activity, which is deeply concerning. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing case. The case of David Viennes. In California, a man jumped off a cliff into the raging waves. A woman who knew him watched in amazement. The jumper was David Viennes, a successful businessman and celebrity chef who owned a popular restaurant chain. What could have motivated such a successful man to take such a drastic action? The situation was more complicated than it seemed, as David was the prime suspect in a serious criminal case at the time of his jump. According to his friends, David Viennes was charismatic, intelligent, and attracted attention wherever he went. David began dating Dawn in the early 90s while working as a chef at a restaurant where she worked as a waitress. At the time, he had 3 children from previous relationships who lived with their mother, but he remained involved in their lives. David focused on the future, leaving behind his past problems and mistakes. David and Dawn's relationship progressed quickly, leading to their marriage in 1997. At that time, David owned a successful chain of restaurants, which provided him with both fame and a stable income. They tied the knot in Lomita, California, a small town with a population of 20,000 known for its safety and low crime rates, making it an ideal setting for their wedding. A close family friend, Joko Knights, who ran a small auto repair shop, became someone they trusted deeply. Through their friendship, Joko learned some private details about their lives, including that David had a domineering personality and that Dawn sometimes struggled with alcohol. Dawn's addiction escalated to the point where she began drinking early in the morning, hiding the bottles so her husband wouldn't find out she had been drinking. She drank to cope with David's cruelty. To hide her finances from her husband, she asked a family friend named Joe to keep her money. According to him, she last gave him money on October 18, 2009. And Dawn had saved over $1,000. The following Monday, Dawn did not show up for work. Her car was parked near her house, but she was missing. Worried, Joe asked David where his wife was, and David replied that she had left the house. He explained that she felt pressured by her husband, so she wanted to go to alcohol withdrawal. Joe is skeptical of David's answer. He begins to monitor David's behavior and realizes that Katie Galvin, one of the waitresses, is having an affair with him. Katie used to work at David's restaurant, and she is now trying to replace Dawn. Dawn is still unreachable, her phone is turned off, and her car is still parked at home. This raises the question, where could Dawn have gone without a car? Joe observes that Dawn's belongings are thrown out. After failing to contact Dawn, her friends filed a police report. David kept telling everyone the same story. They had an argument, and she left, taking only her expensive Louis Vuitton bag. It was strange that she left her car behind, since it was necessary to get around in that small town, which had no airport or train station. She would have needed her own transportation to leave. It seemed unlikely that a rich woman like Dawn would take the intercity bus. While investigating David's past, police found out that he was not only a skilled cook but also sold large quantities of weed. He had been involved in this activity before 2009. His restaurant business was thriving, so he didn't need to closely oversee it. This gave him the opportunity to focus on distributing drugs to small dealers. In 2005, David was arrested for drug trafficking, revealing that this was not his first offense. He had been convicted of similar activities in 1993. David worked as a police informant, always available and assisting when needed. This cooperation led to the dismantling of a citywide drug trafficking network, for which he served only 1 year in prison. In 2008, after being released from prison, David got married and moved to Lomita with Dawn, where they lived until the unfortunate events of 2009. When his wife mysteriously disappeared, he asked his daughter, Jackie, to accompany him to the restaurant to help with the business. Jackie helped with the business, while Katie was his mistress and aspired to be Mrs. David in the future. Jackie was 19 years old at the time. David kept telling everyone the same story about his wife, Dawn's disappearance, that they had a fight and she left him. However, Jackie suspected that her father was not telling the truth. Jackie directly asked her father where Dawn was. David shocked her by admitting that he had accidentally killed Dawn and asked his daughter to keep quiet and not call the police. Jackie agreed. Meanwhile, the police began to suspect David. In response, he took drastic action by asking his new girlfriend Katie to send text messages from Dawn's phone, pretending that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. David thought that once the police saw these messages, they would close the case. However, these messages only raised suspicions. This was because Dawn always signed her messages with the nickname Pixie, but Katie made a mistake and wrote the nickname wrong. The police obtained a search warrant for the David family home and conducted an inspection. They discovered blood in the bedroom and another room, but the stains were old and showed signs of attempted removal, making them unusable as evidence. 16 months after the Dawn's disappearance, it was impossible to find proof of the David's guilt. Although the police were almost certain that the David had killed Dawn, they lacked solid evidence against him. The only lead was the blood found in the house, which ultimately led nowhere. Reporters closely followed the case from the beginning, as it was a novel event in the area. This media attention benefited the investigation by keeping the suspect on edge, as people under pressure tend to make mistakes. One day, a reporter visited a restaurant and loudly claimed that David's entire house was covered in blood. This was a bluff. But it had the effect. David became anxious, and the reporter was expelled from the restaurant. The police decided to question David's daughter, Jackie. 2 police officers met her and took a confession from her. Jackie told them what had happened and then called her father, warning him that the police would be coming to arrest him until a warrant was issued. The press learned of the details and published the story on February 23, 2011. Overwhelmed, David confessed everything to his girlfriend, Katie Galvin. He claimed it was an accident and expressed that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison, saying that ending his life was the better option. After saying this, he rushed to his car, and Katie followed him. Despite the situation, Katie felt calm, believing that he would not harm her. They reached the cliff where David had left Katie in the car. He ran and jumped off the cliff. Amazingly, the 25-meter fall was not fatal for David. He survived. However, David's body had many broken bones. He was rescued from the cliff by a helicopter and taken to the hospital. If he had jumped head first, he would have died, but fate had other plans. A few days later, he confessed to the police from his hospital bed. He mentioned that the most recent conflict with his wife was due to Dawn's bad habits. She was not only abusing alcohol but also addicted to illegal drugs. His daughter confirmed his testimony. David explained that their conflict on the night of the incident was due to illegal substances. He came home after midnight, exhausted from working 90 hours a week. All he wanted was to relax, but he anticipated that his wife would return under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Since she wasn't home yet, he locked the bedroom door to avoid being disturbed and went to sleep. Later, when his wife returned and tried to enter the bedroom, he told her to sleep in another room and not to bother him. The Dawn became angry and burst into the bedroom, breaking the lock, and started hitting David in the face. Afterwards, she ran into the living room. David followed Dawn, saw the substances she had, took them away, and threw them in the sink. In response, she acted aggressively and lunged at him. To protect himself, David used table tape to bind her hands to prevent her from moving, attacking, or throwing anything at him. He mentioned that he had to deal with his wife's psychoses this way more than once. He restrained her and left her there until the effects of the substances faded. While she screamed in anger, David just wanted peace and ended up taping her mouth shut. He went to bed around 3 in the morning. In the morning, as was his habit, he rolled over to his wife's side but found her gone. He fell asleep again, forgetting that she was still tied up in the living room. When he woke up and went downstairs, he found Dawn dead. David realized that under the influence of drugs, she had started to feel nauseous and choked because her mouth was taped shut. In despair, he felt that his life was over. But he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. So he decided to dispose of her body. He carefully packed it and took it to his restaurant. David describes how he used a large vat in the restaurant to dip his wife in water and boil her for 4 days to tenderize the meat. He then cut her body into pieces, put them in garbage bags, and dumped them in a dumpster. When the garbage truck collects the restaurant's food waste, the remains of a boiled human being would likely go unnoticed because they would be unrecognizable. It is hard to understand how this could have happened when the restaurant was open at the time. During the investigation, restaurant staff claimed that they did not remember anything suspicious. The story seemed unbelievable and many people doubted David's testimony. Nearly 2 years later, David, now in a wheelchair, appeared in court. After the first hearing, he dismissed his lawyer, believing that the lawyer was not effectively handling his case. The prosecution suggested a possible motive for the murder. David had previously complained that Dawn had stolen about $200 from the restaurant cash register. During the trial, David claimed that after 17 years of marriage, he would never intentionally harm his wife, especially over such a small amount of money. He found it ridiculous to be charged with first-degree murder for such a trivial reason. David maintained that he had always provided for his wife, buying her expensive clothes. However, the prosecutor portrayed David as a cold-blooded and cruel killer who had planned the murder in advance. The Dawn feared her husband and saved money to leave him, but she ran out of time. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours on the case. David Viennes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2023 after serving 15 years. Currently, he remains incarcerated but could be released at any time. The remains of Dawn Viennes have never been located. Despite extensive searches at the dump, David claimed he hid his wife's skull and jawbone in his mother's attic, but the police were unable to find any evidence there.